Good morning and welcome to the May 10th, 2017 Board of County Commissioners meeting. I'm Kate Flavin, Public Information Officer for Sedgwick County. Commissioners, you have lots of opportunities for great discussion this morning. However, I would like to remind you and everyone watching and everyone here this morning that May is American Stroke Month, and Sedgwick County is partnering with the American Heart Association and providing free blood pressure screenings on the second floor of the courthouse on Wednesdays this month beginning today. So we will have free screenings on May 10th, 17th, 24th, and on May 31st. And these screenings will be available from 10 a.m. until noon on Wednesdays. And with that, Chairman, I will let you kick off the meeting.
Thank you, Kate. You didn't remind us that Sunday's Mother's Day.
I did not. I apologize.
Okay.
I have my gifts ready, so I hope everyone up here does too.
Okay, well, we'll be ready for Mother's Day. So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you for that introduction, and I want to welcome everyone who's here and everyone who's watching by way of television. And at this time, I will call to order the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, May 10th, 2017. Madam Clerk, first item, please.
Invocation to be led by Pastor Brent Workington, First Mennonite Brethren. Please remain standing for the flag salute.
Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for a beautiful spring day. Thank you for these commissioners that are giving so much of their time, for the people in this room who are listening and many participating. I pray that what we do would be pleasing in your sight today. I pray that we would resist pride, that we would embrace a desire to work together and to accomplish the greater good of this wonderful county. So I thank you for the opportunities that you give us to make this world a better place. And I pray that we be faithful in all of that. And, of course, I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pastor Brent, thanks for being with us this morning. Next item.
Roll call. Commissioner Dennis?
Present.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Present.
Commissioner Howell?
Present.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Present.
Chairman Unruh.
Present. And next item.
Public agenda.
I have had notice that two folks want to speak on the public agenda, but I believe that their remarks are going to be specific to agenda item F. And so unless someone wants to speak right now on the tiny home issue, would you rather speak during that agenda item? Okay, we'll hold off then. I don't see anybody else wanting to speak on our public agenda on other issues. So, and just as a way of announcement, I believe that we'll take item F in front of item E when we get to that point in the agenda, so that those citizens won't have to sit through what might be another lengthy discussion on item E. So we'll do it that way. And with that, Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Proclamations. Item A. Proclamation declaring Police Week.
Commissioners, I have a proclamation for your consideration. Whereas in 1962, the United States Congress first passed Public Law 87-726, designating May 15th each year as Peace Officers Memorial Day, honoring federal, state, and local officers who have been killed or disabled in the line of duty, and the corresponding week as Police Week. And whereas over the years, devoted law enforcement officers of America have courageously sacrificed their personal safety while working on behalf of the people. And whereas because of their steadfast efforts to enforce our laws, we as citizens can enjoy a system of peace and order. And whereas Sedgwick County desires to honor the valor, service, and dedication of not only its own sheriff's deputies, but peace officers everywhere. And now, therefore, be it resolved that I, David M. Unruh, Chairman of the Board of Sedgwick County Commissioners, do hereby proclaim May 14th to 20th, 2017 as Police Week in Sedgwick County, and call upon our citizens to show their sincere appreciation for the many law enforcement officers of Sedgwick County, past and present, and their legacy of humble dedicated service to the community. Commissioners, you've heard the proclamation. What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, my father was a police officer when I was born. I'd be very pleased to move that we adopt this proclamation.
Second.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And accepting the proclamation this morning is Sedgwick County Sheriff Jeff Easter.
Thank you, Kate. Well, thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for recognizing Police Week. We do appreciate the men and women of the Sheriff's Office appreciate it. You know, there's been a lot of issues in the last 3 or 4 years in reference to law enforcement. We've seen an increase in law enforcement deaths and shootings and those type of things. But what I'm most proud of is the fact that here in the Sedgwick County area, we enjoy a lot of support from our government entities, from the manager's office to the commissioners, and especially from the citizens. And so that tells us on a daily basis that we know we're doing the right thing and we're protecting and serving the public of Sedgwick County, which we're sworn to do. So we do appreciate recognizing that and appreciate the citizens of Sedgwick County and how they support us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sheriff, and we're pleased to make this proclamation. It seems like perhaps a lame way for us to really acknowledge how much we appreciate the work that the sheriff and police and law enforcement officers all across our community do. But they are appreciated. We know that you are exposed to danger and that you stand between that danger and the citizens and try to keep our community orderly and safe. And we truly are appreciative of the law enforcement officers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, next item.
Item B, proclamation declaring Law Week.
Commissioners, I have another proclamation for your consideration. Whereas our legal institutions and systems of justice depend on popular participation and support to maintain legitimate authority, and whereas lawyers and judges recognize that they bear special responsibility to foster public understanding of law and legal institutions and commitment to the rule of law, and whereas Law Day has been an annual observance since President Dwight Eisenhower established it in 1958 as a time of national dedication to the principle of government under law and is celebrated nationally on May 1st, and whereas the Wichita Bar Association annually joins in this celebration through a variety of activities, including hundreds of attorneys to speak in schools across Sedgwick County to promote awareness of our laws, and will celebrate Law Day 2017 on May 9, and whereas the American Bar Association has designated the 2017 Law Day theme to be the 14th Amendment, Transforming American Democracy, in recognition of the numerous contributions to American law and society of one of the most often cited constitutional enactments. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, David M. Unruh, Chairman of the Board of Sedgwick County Commissioners, do hereby proclaim the second week in May as Law Week in Sedgwick County, Kansas, and I call upon the people of Sedgwick County to acknowledge the importance of our legal and judicial systems with appropriate ceremonies and activities, and to display the flag of the United States and our city and state in support of this educational observance. I further encourage schools, business, media, religious institutions, civic and service organizations to join members of the bar and bench in commemorating Law Week. Commissioners, you've heard the proclamation. What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the proclamation. Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, call the vote, please.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And accepting the proclamation this morning is the President of the Bar Association, Marshall Wood.
Thank you. When President Eisenhower declared the first Law Day for May 1, 1958, he described the rule of law as like the air we breathe. It's so ingrained in the American way of life and the American way of thinking that we really don't consider it and sometimes take it for granted. So this week, the Wichita Bar Association has declared Law Week, and the county has now proclaimed this to be Law Week, as a way for lawyers and judges and legislators and really all citizens to remind ourselves that it is the rule of law that makes America what it is and protects the freedoms we enjoy. So thank you for this proclamation.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you and the Bar Association for calling this to our attention and making us more aware of the importance of the rule of law. I've not heard that quote before, that the rule of law is like the air we breathe, but I think it's a pregnant phrase. It tells a lot about our taking things for granted when we shouldn't, and so we're happy to have this opportunity to elevate our awareness of the Bar Association and our courts and judicial system.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, next item.
Appointments. Item C, resolution appointing Tracy Addington to the Sedgwick County Grievance Board in the alternate classified employee position.
Mr. Chairman, Eric Hills, County Councilor. Before I take up that item, I also want the board to know that Ms. Wood actually represents Sedgwick County in the Law Enforcement Training Center transaction, so we appreciate her efforts on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, item C is a resolution appointing Tracy Addington to the Sedgwick County Grievance Board. There's a classified employee position on that, and then there's the alternate classified employee position. She would be taking the alternate position. She would be replacing Mr. Richard Vargas. Her term would expire May 9th of 2019, and I would urge adoption of the resolution.
All right, Commissioners, what's the will of the board?
Move we adopt the resolution.
Second. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. And is Miss Addington present?
I don't believe she is.
Okay, thank you. Well, she can be sworn at a different time then. So with that, Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
New business. Item D, grant property tax relief in the amount of $1,668.38.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Karen Bailey, Chief Deputy County Clerk. This item is in consideration of a request for property tax relief. And just to give you a little bit of background on this, Kansas statute has a provision that provides for property tax relief if a homestead is destroyed or substantially destroyed as a result of a fire, a flood, an earthquake, tornado, storm, or an event declared as a disaster by the governor. Excuse me. The owner may apply for tax credit or abatement under statute, subject to any budgetary constraints from the county or the other taxing subdivisions within their district. The Board of County Commissioners is tasked with making the following findings. First, if the property is a homestead. Second, if the assessed valuation of the property before the damage. And third, if the property was destroyed or substantially destroyed. So if the cost to restore the property to its before damage condition is greater than or equal to 50% of the market value prior to the event, the property is deemed destroyed or substantially destroyed. However, if the cost does not meet the 50% standard, then it is considered not substantially destroyed and it doesn't qualify for tax relief. Sedgwick County adopted a resolution to establish the procedures to evaluate these applications. On this item, an application was filed by the property owner, Toya Bulla, requesting property tax relief for damage sustained to her property located at 238 East Main in Mount Hope. She was notified of the agenda item for this morning's business. Ms. Bulla's application indicates that the property suffered damage as a result of a fire on February 18th of this year. The property's assessed valuation before the damage was $12,260. The damage was found to be 95% of the pre-damage value. So this property does qualify for the credit. The valuation and damage were assessed by our county appraiser's office. The recommendation is to issue an order granting property tax relief in the amount of $1,668.38 and authorize the chairman to sign.
All right, thank you, Karen. We have a comment from Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to reflect on why this comes to us for our consideration this morning. That is, when I was in the legislature, reflecting back on the Oak Lawn tornado that happened in 2012, a great number of homes were destroyed or substantially destroyed, and seemed especially cruel at that point when people were very much struggling, trying to get back on their feet, to come after them with a property tax bill. And so this was just a very small option for us we created to kind of give a little bit of relief for someone who's going through a very, very hard time. We passed the initial bill in 20. Actually, I think it was in 2013 we passed that bill. In fact, I'd like to say that Senator Michael O'Donnell, now Commissioner, my colleague, and I worked together on this and got this done. I'd also like to recognize Senator Mike Peterson as well. And I appreciate every time this kind of thing comes to us, it reminds me of that tornado in Oak Lawn and how we as commissioners can help people who are struggling one by one when these things come before us. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we would issue the order approving the property tax relief and authorize the chairman to sign.
Thank you. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis? Aye. Commissioner Ransaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. Thank you, Karen. Before we go any further, I'd like to recognize the presence of former Commissioner Carl Peter John. Welcome to our meeting, Mr. Peter John. At this point, Commissioners, with your approval, we'll switch items E and F, and I'll ask the clerk to call item F, please.
Item F, a county conditional use request for a one-vehicle recreational vehicle park on property zoned rural residential.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dale Miller, Planning Staff. As she indicated, this is a conditional use request for a one-unit recreational vehicle to be located on the property with the arrow pointing to it there, about halfway between North Hillside and 47th Street. This is the zoning map, and as you can see here, the property is zoned RR rural residential, as is all of the property surrounding it. There's an aerial. It is currently vacant except for the RV that you'll see here in a moment. To the east, the lot that is located here is the same owner as the application area. So the owner has a house here. The person that would occupy the proposed RV is not an owner of any of the land, but would just reside there in the RV. And then you can see here further to the east there are unplatted and platted large lot residential home sites. To the north, there is a very large lot residential home site here in the center, farm ground to the either side of that, and additional farm ground with a farmstead there. The comprehensive plan shows this is to be in the rural area. Protests equaling 18.57% have been received because it did not meet the 20% criteria. This case can be approved with a simple majority, or if you decide to deny it, it will take a 2/3 or 4 out of 5 vote to override the recommendation of approval by the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. I think there are people here to speak both for and against the application, but in general, some of the concerns that were expressed was that this particular use would be out of character with the site-built homes that are found in the areas to the east and north, and would represent a potential to allow that if this one's approved, then it would allow additional recreational vehicle campgrounds with many more units in, as opposed to just the one as it is proposed. The applicant, see if I can get to the property does have floodplain on it. However, the location where the proposed RV would be located is outside of the floodplain, as is the wastewater solution. Site plan showing the proposed RV and how other structures might be located on the property. There is the RV. It was, as I understand it, it was built by the applicant, and she wishes for it to remain on the wheels. So that's why it had to be considered a recreational vehicle. Couldn't consider it a home because it's not going to be placed on a permanent foundation, still going to remain on the wheels. And there's several paragraphs in the staff report that explain how we got to the decision that this was an RV. The zoning code allows the zoning administrator to evaluate each individual request and classify the use to the category that it best fits, and that's what happened here. The zoning administrator determined that this particular setup was a recreational vehicle, and so that's how we got to the conditional use request for a one-unit recreational vehicle campground. The applicant has agreed to a number of stipulations. Part of them are that should the home be moved off the site for 30 days, that the conditional use would be null and void. The conditional use would last for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, if they still wanted to live there, they could come back and ask the Planning Commission for an additional 2 years. But there's nothing that requires it to remain there for the 3 years. If, for example, the owner would move out of state and decide to take the unit with them, then once it's gone for 30 days, then the conditional use is null and void. This is looking north towards the section line road. Looking northeast, these trees screen the unit from the road to some degree. There's a break where the driveway is that allows a pretty good view of the home as you drive by. Looking west, looking southwest on the section line road again. Looking southeast, back towards the home that is owned, that the owner of this tract owns with a site-built home. And looking east down the section line road and west. And there is the driveway entrance that gives view to it when you go by. Northeast again. And I believe that's it. With that, I would try and answer questions. Tim Wagner is here if you have questions about the wastewater solution. I believe the applicant or her agents are here, as well as people that are interested in speaking on the subject.
All right, thank you, Dale. Commissioners, do you have any questions of either Dale or legal counsel before we ask for public comment? I don't see any. I would declare that I have not had any direct ex parte communication on this issue. I did receive voice message, and we have printed backup material on this agenda item that I've read through, and it's not influenced my opinion, and I'm ready to hear testimony and make my decision based on the testimony today. And commissioners, if you've had any ex parte communication, now would be a good time to speak to that. First, Commissioner Ransell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I had an ex parte communication with Stephanie Bowen several weeks ago. She called and expressed her concerns about this, and I have driven out to the site. That being said, I'm going to abstain from this vote for a multitude of reasons. While I don't know Jordan Wallem, but I think I know virtually everybody else involved in this. I know her parents, her grandparents, her uncles. I went to school with them and wrestled with them, and their granddad has supported me politically in the past, so for a myriad of reasons, I think it's best. One of the concerns that was brought up to me was that John McKay was on the MAPC, and it looked bad, and like I say, I've known John and, well, everybody for decades, and so I think it's best that for appearances at least that I abstain from this particular vote.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you. I just want to declare that I have had ex parte contact. I have read all of the staff reports, and it does not affect my decision.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also did have a little bit of ex parte communication. A lady named Dusty, Self, that's D-U-S-T-E-E, Self, who lives in Bel Air, called me on the 4th of May and was advocating for support for the owner of this RV. And we briefly spoke. I encouraged her to email her concerns, her ideas, and I don't think I did receive any email from her. But my decision today will be based on what's presented today. I have not driven by it, and I'm not friends with anybody involved in this, and so my decision today will be solely based on what's presented here before us today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other comment or question before we ask for public comment? Seeing none, I know there's 2 people who have signed up, and if there are others here who want to speak, we'll allow for that. But first was, is it Jordan Mullen? If you'd like to step to the podium and state your name.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jordan Mullen, and I'm the owner of the tiny home being discussed today. First, a short background on myself. I've always lived in this community. I grew up around there my whole life. There's only 2 times where I didn't live there. It was while I received my college education at Friends University. I lived in town Wichita, and when I was 11 years old, my parents, growing up, they purchased 80 acres not too far from this property and designed and built their forever home. But when I turned 11, we had a house fire and lost the house and all the way. So we had to look for a new place to live. We lived in a couple different areas and moved around, but they found another home just 2 miles east of that. And the only reason and that's where they still live today. The only reason I'm telling you this is because I believe it has, and it is one of the reasons why I've chosen to live in a tiny home, to live tiny. I value my family and my relationships a lot more than I value items or something I could build with my own two hands. But that doesn't mean I'm not able to take pride in what I do own. My parents and family all have very desirable homesteads and houses, and I will never speak ill of such things, but for me personally right now, I look forward to experiencing a minimalistic lifestyle. We started this journey a few months ago. My aunt and uncle offered up their extra 5 acres. They live on 5 and have 5 right next to it for me to have a place to put my tiny home while I still choose to live here in town. So they started making the phone calls. We knew that we would need water and electrical and all that stuff. And so they called on the water. The water meter dropped in. We told them what we were doing, and they dropped it in and went in really smoothly. We called Westar, and they brought out and installed the transformer. They knew it was going in for a tiny home plot over there. And but when it came to dropping in the meter, Westar said, we would like the unit to be brought out on this property so we can see what's going to be plugged into this meter here. And so we tried to show them some pictures and really explain to it. It would plug in very much like an RV, a 50 amp plug, and this is what we would be doing. And they said, go ahead and bring it out here. And we said, okay. So that was about on a Thursday, and they were going to come back the following Monday. So we got some gravel out there on the property and got the tiny home out that Saturday and just parked it out there for them to see it. So Westar came out the following Monday, and they looked at it and said, yeah, that'll work. Go ahead and call your county and look into rezoning for this property there, because you're going to be plugging it in. This might be considered an RV and whatnot. And we said, oh. And we would have liked them to tell us that kind of before we had moved it out there, but that's all right. And during this whole process, as new things came along, we'd stop what we do and follow what people are telling us, and because we want to follow the rules and do this the appropriate way. So now this is the 3rd meeting. We had the first meeting, we chose to defer it because we found out about protests like right there at the meeting. We chose to defer it so we could go around and talk face to face with our neighbors and inform them exactly what we're going to do, because the conditional use sign that we were required to put up just said development for an RV park. And so we thought it was important to just express to them our intentions and what we will be doing. The second meeting came along, and we had time to do that footwork, and during that time we were able to write up a restricted covenant, and that's kind of just an extra step that we took to protect the property and to ensure the neighbors that we're going to do exactly what we're saying we're going to do. It's tied to the VIN number on my trailer only, and after the 5 years, that property cannot be used for the recreational purpose ever again. And so now we're at the third meeting after the appeal process came through, and at this point I would like to discuss some of the points I discussed at the second meeting, just to clarify some issues that were brought up, and then after that I will answer any questions you guys may have. So one of the things was the disposal process. We talked to this with the county, and I informed them that I would be having a composting toilet and a gray water system. At no time has there ever been or will there be any kind of sewage exiting my house. Through this system, it's only going to be gray water exiting my house because of the type of toilet that I did decide to purchase. Also, an issue of property value was brought up in regards to the neighbors. As far as I understand, the tiny home itself is private property. It will move as the landowners move or myself move away. That being said, the tiny home cannot devalue my aunt and uncle's house or property, land, let alone the surrounding areas around it. It would be like owning a flatbed trailer on your property and parking it there. It doesn't affect the house or the land worth that it's parked on. Second, the terminology of RV park. I know we don't have actual tiny home laws set in place at this time. And because of this, I tried to ask for a variance. First of all, I tried to ask for a variance, and I was instructed at that point to apply for a CUP, conditional use permit. I understand that Sedgwick County is working with what they do legally have right now, and that is the RV laws set in place. And they're already legal and safe for individuals to be living in an RV and live around the RV. So as I agree to live by this CUP that we're discussing today, I also am agreeing to live by those rules, and with the electricity, the sewer disposal, and water intake and whatnot, and paying my taxes. I appreciate the opportunity of the conditional use permit because I know that it will allow me to live in my home with specific codes and laws that are set in place to protect myself and the surrounding neighbors. Another concern was a lack of respect and to my neighbor's property. I want you all to know that I respect my neighbors and their property very much. By no means did we sneak the tiny home out there. Like I said, we did things in the order because of kind of how we were instructed as we went. And so the staff gave me a list of addresses to contact within the 1,000 feet, and as soon as we got that, I sent out a personal letter before the first meeting, before all this started, just to kind of give them a heads up. And it's been interesting. Before people got to know me, they had some pretty strong concerns, and I was called heartless and disrespectful, and that I was intentionally breaking the law. And they even brought up a website, like explaining to tiny homeowners, hey guys, this is how you should live illegally. And they used it as one of their references in a letter. And I just hope that after me explaining the order and why we did what we did, you can understand that by no means that was the case. And if any one of my neighbors would have had concerns, I wish they would have come to me directly, and that was the whole point of my personal letter, to get to them that day. And so now, since the last couple meetings, now, since the first meeting, I was able to go around to those neighbors and have the conversation with them about what we were actually doing. And it was at that time I wrote up a restrictive covenant, and I have that here today. I think you guys might have a copy of that. If not, I can give it to you. And a lot of neighbors, it kind of put them at ease face to face. They really appreciated that, and so I think that was just a good move on our part. And so, in conclusion, I want to have the freedom to go where my career takes me, but for the time being, this is my home, and I want to be in this community. I jumped on the opportunity. Not only am I safer to be living near my family, but I'm excited to take care of the property beforehand. Addition to the neighborhood, I'm asking you all today to understand the conditional use is the only way at this moment in time to let me live in my home on the private property. I wish the verbiage was different. I honestly believe that calling it an RV park was the biggest concern, and so I called Sedgwick County Zoning Department on April 5th, the day before the last meeting, just to clarify what it would look like on the new zoning maps, and they told me that it would still be named rural residential, but it would have a tag onto it just claiming it has a CUP, and then you could research what that is for. Last but not least, I like to continue to work with the county in any way possible to help address the tiny home laws and terminology for the future. I want to thank you for your time today, and I would like to answer any other questions you may have.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. Commissioners, are there any questions? I see none, so thank you.
Thank you.
We have another person signed up to speak. Is it Krista McKay?
Hi, I'm Krista McKay. My husband and I own, it's a total of 10 acres, but we own this 5 and we live next to this other 5. I've been in real estate for almost 20 years, and I know the big issue with the homeowners, this affects their property value. This is considered personal property. It's not considered real property. Where we live, it's not a neighborhood. I have 10 acres. The people across the street have 40. The guy next door has 4. As far as property value goes, everybody's diverse. I could be worth 300. The guy across the street could be worth 150. And I think Mrs. Bowen, who's upset, is out of the 1,000 square foot, and I think she built $1 million house. That's her choice to do so. My husband has lived in the area for almost 45 years. I built my very first house probably 4 miles from there at 93rd and Rock in 2000. I bought the 20 acres that I sold the 20 acres behind me that people built a house, and they raised show goats. So they put up this big fence around this 20 acres, and they had show goats, and they still have show goats. But at the end of the day, they bought rural property, and I can't tell them what they can and cannot do. As far as the tiny home on this property, I guess I popped off too soon, but if I can put a mobile home there, which I can put a mobile home without permission, I just have to get a permit through Kelly Dixon to put one there. I can have 20 pigs on this property without anybody's permission, per county code rule. I assume this would be considered the same thing. So in working with Kelly Dixon, which I have for 20 years, for real estate transactions, I'm like, what do I need to do? He said, you need to change your zoning. Shouldn't be that big a deal. Fill out an application, pay $660 and go to the planning commission. we did that, and we had never been approached by anybody that lived in the area. So even though I don't have a map, but even though people protested, not one person came and knocked on my door or asked a question. They just assumed we were breaking the law and doing all these things. And in the meantime, we were working with the county. We're working with Tim Wagner on the wastewater. We're working with things that we're supposed to do per code. Now, the Bowens live on some ground, and they have restrictive covenants. There's a couple other people that live out of the area in a neighborhood on acreage, and they have restrictive covenants. We do not have restrictive covenants on this property at all. And at the end of the day, I think as long as I'm following county code and county regulations, Sedgwick County is my homeowners association. She's not devaluing my property today, tomorrow, 5 years from now. That 5 acres is still going to be worth today what it's going to be worth 5 years from now. Maybe go up, but her tiny home has no bearing on anybody's property, because when an appraiser goes out to appraise a property, that's invisible because it's private, it's personal property, it's not real. And I think that was just the biggest problem with a lot of people, was that is devaluing their property, and that's going to set a precedence for other people to go do a tiny home thing. I have no control over anybody else, but she's not hurting anybody. She spent 2 years designing it. She's spent a ton of money. She's got a $2,000 toilet in there. I don't know anybody in here who has a $2,000 toilet, but she did state of the art. She did her research, and I think she did an amazing job. And as long as we do what county says we need to do, she's not hurting anybody. So.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Commissioners, any questions? I see none, so thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this topic who did not sign up to speak? I don't see anyone rising to speak. So, commissioners, do you have any comments or questions? Commissioner Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. I don't know who can answer them, so I'll just ask the room and see if someone can answer. Curiously, again, if I understand correctly, this is being considered personal property. So in regards to our appraiser's office, are they going to issue, I guess, an assessment of value for the land itself, and then the building will be taxed as personal property? I'm getting to the issue of how this is going to be classified in terms of our tax collection. Is it real property or personal property? And
I contacted the assessor's office and asked them, because at the planning commission meeting there were questions about how this would be categorized, and what they told me was that the RV itself would be considered personal property.
Okay. And she mentioned that it has a VIN on the trailer, I guess. I don't know how that works, but does she need to pay some kind of personal property taxes to the DMV because of that? Does it get some kind of a license? Or
if it's over 2,000 pounds, and I assume that the house itself is that and plus, that they're required to get a tag.
Okay, so this would have like a tag, so they could go down the road. Down the road, it would have to.
That's my understanding.
That current. Okay. And one of the previous speakers mentioned a restrictive covenant as a possibility. Can you verify that? Had the landowners wanted to do this, they could have developed a restrictive covenant for some region around these properties, like an HOA type of agreement amongst the landowners on what's allowed. Is that type of thing done in the county, and would that have been an option before this was proposed today?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what you're asking, but I mean, a restrictive covenant essentially is an agreement between a buyer and a seller to certain conditions, and it's strictly up to the buyer and the seller to agree and enter into that contract between themselves. It would not be anything that Sedgwick County would enforce.
Right. I understand that. And again, there's obviously a lot of people are aware of homeowners associations all over the place. Some of them I think are even out in the county, and I guess landowners would have the option of organizing some type of an association between them that would be self-imposed limitations on their agreement between those different landowners that would be an option that they could have done at some point in the past had they wanted to do that. Is that true?
Yes, I mean, I guess what, typically platted properties come with restricted covenants that the developer places on there. The particular properties closest to the application area are not platted, so
okay.
There's no covenants attached.
Okay, very good. Again, this might be an appraiser's question, but someone made a comment that the personal property parked on land, imagine if it was a trailer or a boat or an actual RV being parked on this land, how that would have any impact on property values around this property. Is there anybody that can speak to that or can verify that that doesn't have an impact?
I sell real estate, and it's, again, it's personal property, so it has zero bearing on an appraisal.
Miss, would you like to hear a comment? Would you please step to the podium?
In real estate, it's personal property, so it has zero bearing on an appraiser doing an appraisal on a property. So if the guy at the corner sells his house and actually in the county, appraiser gets to go within 9 to 10 miles outside his radius because it's so diverse. It's not like a neighborhood where it's 1 of 4 plans, and they've sold a bunch of them. They have 12, they get to go back 12 months to find a like property that's being sold. So they have to find a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 5 acres. Jordan's place would be invisible because it's not permanent. It's not real property. It's personal.
Right.
So it doesn't have a bearing on my house if I sell it tomorrow. I mean, because she can leave tomorrow and it's gone. So as far as property value, real property value, she holds zero bearing on anybody's value.
Yeah, I guess my comment on that, it does make sense to me, and I appreciate your position. I was wanting to get someone else besides you.
Sorry.
No, this is great. I appreciate you explaining to me a little further. Again, your logic does make sense to me, and I think I would agree with what you're saying. I would just wonder if there's anybody that can confirm that. And so anyway, to the extent there's nobody else here to speak on that, I'll assume that that's probably true. Thank you for your comment.
Okay.
Maybe one more for Mr. Miller, real quickly. She made a comment earlier that she could have someone could have put a mobile home on this property and not had to go through this process. Is that true?
No. The only home that's allowed by right, and this gets into technicalities, is a residential design manufactured home. And those by definition are 22 feet wide or wider, have a sloped roof, and have siding and roofing material that are similar to site-built homes and placed on a permanent foundation. By state law, those are required to be treated as if they were site-built. All other modulars, single wides require, in order to do a single wide, you have to have 20 acres. Otherwise, you have to get a conditional use. So there was an error in that.
That makes sense to me as well. Can someone tell me what happens, how do they handle the gray water that's produced here? What's the plan with the gray water? Maybe Ms. Mullen can come back to the podium and tell me what happens to the gray water.
Good morning, I'm Tim Wagner with Sedgwick County. They're going to use a wetland, basically wastewater system. It's only going to handle the gray water. It gets treated in the wetland. Most of it's probably going to evaporate. It's going to be so little use there. If there was an overflow, there's going to be an overflow lateral line, so it'll be discharged underground at that time.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm also curious, we've talked about electric, we've talked about wastewater. Is there a plan for propane at this site? Does that matter? I'm not sure. This is probably a total electric home, I'm guessing. Some RVs use propane. I was just curious if there was planned to be a propane tank out there. Okay. I'm sorry, I make her come back up again.
That's fine. I don't mind answering your questions. I do have 2 propane tanks like you would see in front of an Airstream or an RV. They're mounted on the trailer. The temporary ones you would go fill and exchange, and it just works my stovetop. So,
all right, very
and
good.
my instant hot water heater.
Thank you very much. I got one more for Mr. Miller, and I'll probably stop talking after this. But if somebody wanted to build a very small home, let's say 300 square foot home out there, they could do that, could they not? I mean, it could essentially be built very similarly to what's on this trailer. They could have pulled permits or whatever and built a very small home on a foundation and done that by right. Is that
Absolutely.
true? There's no requirement for a size or a look or anything like that. All right. Well, I'll be thinking about this for another few minutes, but it's all my questions for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, is there any other comment or question? What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the conditional use subject to the conditions recommended by the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, adopt the findings of the MAPC, authorize the chairman to sign the prepared resolution.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second, and now discussion on the motion. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would have been glad to motion or second, but I'll be supporting the motion this morning. I would like to just say, as we move forward, I think, I'm fully aware that this is kind of a thing that's kind of sweeping the nation. I think that I'll use the word tiny home rather than RV. I think the reason we're using the word RV is we don't have anything in our code that really recognizes this specific type of housing. And I think we need to go ahead and ask our experts in different in planning or wherever to begin to develop something that would deal with tiny home zoning and standards. And I remember listening to one of the city council meetings a while back, and I think, or maybe it was just one of the city council members of the city of Wichita, but they've talked about using tiny homes as an area to help with inexpensive housing for some of the folks downtown somewhere in the city. So this is something I think is going to continue to be developing. We'll see more and more of this as we go forward. I think we need to not use an RV standard and do it this way. I think we need to have a separate set of language for tiny homes. And so I guess I'd like to ask our staff to put that on their things to do list, and hopefully we will be able to handle this differently as we do these in the future. That's all my comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll echo Commissioner Howell's comments. I served on the MAPC for 9 years and never had a case like this in the total 9 years that I served. So I think maybe that it would be a good idea to have some additional guidance out there on what we do with tiny homes in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other comment or question? We have a motion and a second, and I see there's no other request to speak, so Madam Clerk will ask you to call the vote, please.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza? Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh?
Aye. And we have a follow-up comment from Commissioner Ranswell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I explained earlier, I did abstain, and I went out of my way not to speak to my commissioners about this issue at all before it came forward. And now that it's over, I do want to concur with my colleagues, and that I think we need to address this as we move forward. I think the idea that it was called an RV campground raised a lot of concerns. I think the arguments made by the applicant and Ms. McKay were very compelling. I do support this decision. I think it was the right decision to make, and I'd be interested in working with staff to move forward and try to find a possible way to amend our code so that we can make this more clear and easier for people in the future.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Well, thanks to all who participated in this discussion, and now we will move forward with the agenda. Madam Clerk, I believe we're ready to have you call item E.
Yes, sir. Item E, West Bank Redevelopment District Tax Increment Financing.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Brent Shelton with the Sedgwick County Department of Finance, and the item before you this morning is the consideration of tax increment financing for the West Bank Redevelopment District. It's a request that you are receiving from the City of Wichita. I'll get the slideshow ready. Basically, when a tax increment financing district is proposed by a city, it comes before the Board of County Commissioners. You have a 30-day window from the time that tax increment finance district was approved by a city to take one of three actions. You may vote by simple majority to approve that TIF district. You may vote by simple majority to veto the TIF district, or you may take no action, and in which case that TIF district, it has the same effect as an affirmative vote for the TIF district. To give you a little bit of background about the district that's being proposed, it's considered phase 2 of the River District development that the city developed a plan for in 2007. If you look at the map, you can see that the gray area entitled River District was phase 1 of that area. It has basically received public financing in terms of the East Bank TIF district and some STAR bonds. The area that you're going to be considering today is in roughly in this blue area, but it also covers a little bit of additional area. This depicts in the green the East Bank TIF district, and the reason we talk about that a little bit is that it's phase 1. You're looking today at phase 2, which is roughly outlined in blue on the west side of the district. Let's take a minute and just discuss what is a tax increment finance district. It's basically an economic development financing tool that pays for infrastructure improvements that are done today with future revenues that are generated from the increased assessed valuation that occurs over time. If you look at the model, the part that is in orange, basically you freeze the tax base at the current level, and that is the tax levies that are generated going forward for the participating tax authorities. In this case, it'd be the city, the county, and the school district. Once that infrastructure has been improved, development has occurred, you begin to see an increase in the tax base represented in the light blue area. Taxes that are generated from that incremental valuation, that additional growth, are used to repay bonds or other type of financing that was used to pay for that infrastructure. At the end of the lifespan of the TIF, instead of being down at this level, the tax authorities jump to a higher tax base because of that increased assessed valuation. TIF districts have been used across the county before, most of them in the city of Wichita. We have one in the city of Derby, so it's not something that is brand new to the area. The specific one that you're looking at today, the geographic areas within which that incremental tax would be captured and your tax base would be frozen for the life of the TIF, start roughly from McLean and Meridian and move north, McLean and Maple, and move north along McLean Boulevard, past Lawrence Dumont Stadium, Metropolitan Baptist Church, end up at 2nd Street, go west to cover the area where the new library is being built, then south to Pearl Street. Pearl's a block north of Douglas. It runs west to Seneca, south a couple blocks back to Sycamore, south to Kellogg, and then goes around the ice rink back up to the point of beginning. It does encompass the Delano Business District, as well as a lot of the area here that was originally designated in that River District plan. The proposal that the city has presented basically generates money. If you look on this from the Catalyst site, that's the area in yellow at the top of the map. That's an area of property that is currently owned by the city. It's tax exempt. The new public library is being built on the north part of this real estate. The city proposes to sell this to a private developer for anticipated $50 million development. That additional tax revenue would be then used to fund improvements, mostly in the green area below, which is the stadium, to either substantially renovate or rebuild Lawrence Dumont Stadium with the hopes of attracting a minor league baseball team, and then seeing additional growth over the next 10 or 15 years. It's been anticipated of about $125 million during that time period. Those tax revenues from that additional growth would be used to pay for that improvement to the stadium, some parking improvements to the tune of about $8 million, a greenway that runs basically south of that catalyst site and then along Pearl Street, and some additional infrastructure along probably McLean Boulevard. So that's the deal that has been proposed today. And my job after we get one of these is to look at the county policy and determine whether or not this TIF proposal would create adverse effect on the county. When we look for adverse effect, county policy that was adopted in 2008 tells us to look for these 5 things. So we've gone through an analysis of looking at the 5 factors to see whether or not we can determine that this creates adverse effect. So let's just take each one. I'll summarize what was given to you in a report about a week ago, and we can see what we found. First of all, does the loss of tax revenue that the county would suffer hinder effective delivery of public services? Currently, within the geographic area of this TIF district or this redevelopment district, you're receiving about $120,000 in tax revenues from the real estate in the area. With the TIF, that would be the tax base or the tax levy going forward for up to about 20 years. If we look at a couple of percent growth that we're seeing, kind of that level of growth in the area, you would forego about $500,000 in tax revenues over the lifespan of the TIF district or over the next 20 years. If the TIF works as performed, you would forego that $500,000, and in the 21st year, when the TIF is turned off, the tax levy for the county would be about $900,000. So what we're looking at is a loss of tax revenue of $500,000, given the status quo, over 20 years, and our tax levy would be somewhere around $180,000 in that 20th year. If the TIF works, the tax levies for the county would be at about $980,000 in that 21st year. So you forego it at the front end, it's repaid back in the 21st year. What effect does that have on service delivery? The first year you're looking at $2,500. I mean, it's I'm not seeing that the county would be expending a lot of additional resources in the area, and I'm not seeing that that level of tax loss would have an adverse effect on our service delivery. Is this project feasible if the county doesn't get involved? The stadium construction's been anticipated in the $35 to $40 million range. I've seen some estimates it's a little higher than that. Part of the financing package for this is STAR bonds, which capture sales tax revenues, and there's $20 million earmarked from that to go to stadium construction. In the TIF proposal, they're looking at about $14 million to go toward stadium construction. I looked at the sale of the catalyst site, the development that is anticipated to occur subsequent to that and outside that catalyst site area. If that occurs, then on the face of it, there would be enough incremental tax revenues to pay back $25 million in TIF bonds. If we took the school district and the county's support or our tax revenues from that incremental value out of that, the city would have about a third of what they need to support TIF bonds. So the question, the but-for question, would this occur without TIF? On the face of it, it's going to need some type of public support to make up that shortfall of $15 to $16 million that the city would have to pay back if they do go out and float bonds to the tune of $25 million. The third question speaks to private equity funding. That one's tough for us, or impossible for us to address at this time. Typically, when we look at a TIF district, we have a developer asking for some specific infrastructure improvements. In this case, the developer hasn't been identified, so what we're looking at is if these developments occur at this level, would there be enough money to support the TIF? We really can't speak to whether or not we have a solid developer or not. Since this talks to risk, I would just say that the risk to the county is the foregone taxes if the TIF is implemented and it doesn't perform. The city is going to issue general obligation debt to pay for these improvements. The TIF revenues would, to the extent that they are sufficient to pay that back, would pay that. If they're short, the city's going to make up the difference that they issue for that general obligation debt. The TIF won't become active until there's a project plan filed. A project plan requires a 2/3 vote of the city council. And so basically what we're seeing is one thing has to happen in order for the other to occur. On the face of this, like I say, we can't really identify whether or not we've got adequate private funding at this point. Are the costs to the government, to the county government, greater than the benefits? Some things to consider. We forego $500,000 over the next 20 years by freezing our tax base. If you assume that this would happen without TIF and all this development would occur, our contributions over that lifetime from our increased levies that are being diverted to TIF could amount to about $11 million. So if this deal can be done without TIF, that's what you're foregoing. So is it $500,000 or $11 million? It depends on whether you fall on it can happen without it. And at this point in the face of it, well, I'm not seeing how it can happen without something to replace that $15 or $16 million shortfall. The other thing is that, as we mentioned earlier, you forego that $500,000 over 20 years. Instead of having $180,000 taxes generated from this area in 20 years, assuming status quo growth, you're looking at about a $980,000 tax levy for the county in that 21st year. And finally, I would say that we were given sufficient notification. We got the public notices and so forth from the city. We knew a little bit ahead of time that this was going on. We have 10 data items that we request when we're looking at these. Number 9 on that pertains specifically to private equity funding. Do we have a letter from a bank that says that they're going to come up with the money? That's one that we can't address at this time because we don't know the developer. And the 10th item on that list speaks to some of the specific infrastructure improvements. We got a list of general improvements that's typical with what we receive on TIF district proposals. More details would come in a project plan if that was filed at some point in the future. Let me stop at this point. I'll answer questions or give up the lectern if someone else wants to speak.
Well, thank you for that presentation, Brent. Commissioners, are there any clarifications or questions that you have for Brent at this time? Commissioner Ranzo.
Thank you. Yeah, well, let me clarify, just for the record, our task here today is not decide whether we think the project itself is a good project or not.
Right.
It's completely has to do with this particular form of the part of the financing, the TIF district, whether or not it's advantageous to the county or is in their best interest, doesn't harm, et cetera. That's solely what we're discussing here today, right?
I think you're looking at whether tax increment financing is appropriate for the proposal that you're looking at.
And we have a policy that says we need to look at these things.
Mm-hmm.
Proposed project is economically feasible without the county. Now, you said if we don't have the TIF, there would be a need for some sort of funding,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which could come from, could it come from a CID? Could it come from, because they're going to do, you said the GO bonds, they could use revenues from the general fund or a CID or some other way as well to pay that off?
Right.
requirement per se that it has to be through a TIF district necessarily.
Right. If the, what my analysis was saying is that within these geographic boundary, if the city proposed to go forward with this and bank on their additional tax revenue, they're going to be short by about 2/3.
Right.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's economically feasible without the TIF district if they could come up with alternative ways to pay for that particular amount.
Have to find it somewhere.
Right.
Yep.
Now, the question, we've talked about this, the costs to the county government are greater than the benefits. You're doing an analysis based on what you're given as far as the revenue that's going to be generated by the TIF itself. You look solely within the TIF.
Right.
Now, and I've got some information, some data on TIF, research on TIF districts I'll enter in the record later, and I've shared it with commissioners and staff as well. The question is, if this TIF creates, and this is a big issue, if this creates increased economic development and property tax revenue beyond what would have been created otherwise, then that's extra revenue. And that leads you down one conclusion. Mm-hmm. But if there's a substitutive effect, or if the creation of this TIF district in this manner harms areas outside of that area and therefore decreases the property values there, then it could be that there's a substitutive effect and there really is no net increase. And then if that's the case, then that leads you down a different path of whether or not this form of financing would harm the county or not. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's really all I have for now. I'll talk more and maybe read some stuff later, but I want to clarify where we're at on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other questions or clarifications from Mr. Shelton? Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Again, I know we don't get to vote necessarily on the Star Bond issue, but can you please remind me, what's the status of the Star Bond district? Is it, the city did approve that? Does the state need to do anything with this before it goes forward?
From my understanding, the city approved the Star Bond last week, and that would, based on feasibility study that they received for that, and they're anticipating $20 million increase in revenues through those sales tax. So I think that portion has gone through the approval phase.
And unlike this tax increment financing option, the Star Bond, does it capture all of the sales tax that is collected in that Star Bond district? So in other words, if the county is currently collecting some of the money and maybe other cities are collecting, because we have a 1 cent county sales tax, which is distributed amongst all cities of Sedgwick County plus the county government itself. So that Star Bond district would essentially already lower that revenue by some amount. So that $20 million is over 20 years. That's assuming that the project goes forward and all that economic growth continues to happen. But do we know what our base is on sales tax within that Star Bond district that we've already essentially given up potentially?
I don't know
that. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all my questions so far.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? Okay. I see Mr. Von Onen standing behind Mr. Shelton. Are you wanting to make a comment?
I do have some clarification. Good morning, Commissioners. John Von Ashton, Assistant County Counselor. I did provide a handout for you regarding actions that you can take, and I think it's appropriate this time to go through the actions before you hear any other speakers so that you know exactly what your actions are. The statute contemplates 3 options, 2 of which are affirmative actions by the Commission, and 1 is essentially an inaction. The first thing by statute to address is that you can consent to the TIF. In other words, you take an affirmative vote by simple majority to consent that the city can go ahead and go forward to do this. The second option, and this is specifically worded this way in the statute, is that you have to make an adverse finding. In other words, you have to find something specific in the proposal that would be adverse to the county. If it is simply a neutral item, then that doesn't rise to the level. You have to make an adverse finding pointing to something specific in the proposal that you would find to be adverse to the county, and that would be part of what Mr. Shelton presented to you. The third option is to take no action, in which case, because the statute says if you don't take an action, it goes through. So you have the option of not taking any action on the TIF. Your 30 days, I believe, expires tomorrow, in which case that if we don't provide something to the city that's an adverse action, then it's deemed okay for them to go forward. As to the county commission, they do have to get approval from 259 on this. Those are the two taxing authorities that are contemplated by statute. So I wanted to make sure that you understood what was before you today, so that you could, as you're receiving additional comments and contemplating the action, that you knew exactly what you would need to do on this, which is either consent, make an adverse finding, or take no action. So I'll take any questions regarding those options.
I see no commissioner asking to speak, so thank you for that clarification. Commissioners, I want to give public an opportunity to speak on this issue, and I think now's an appropriate time to do that. So if there's anyone here in the audience who would like to speak, then if you would step to the podium and give us your name, please. We used to ask for name and address, but we've had some complaint about publicly revealing your address. I don't know that it's required, and our clerk's office will probably pick your address up from you privately, so at least tell us your name.
Janice Manlove. I'm honored to sit on Commissioner Dennis's Citizens Advisory Board that he started. I just have a comment, and this is a very ignorant person here, but when I look at this plan, just so much of it is already developed, and I'm not quite sure why the whole Delano area was included in that. Maybe there's infrastructure that they need to do in that, I don't know. But it looked to me like the only place that can be developed is what isn't around the library, or what isn't being used by the library. So it just seems like such a huge area. Well, I guess it's because the stadium's being redone. So I just find it odd that all of Delano was included in that, and that Mr. Ruffin owns quite a bit of that, some of that property down in there, and I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak, either for or against? If you would step to the podium and state your name. I think you're familiar to most of us, Mr.
I think I'm very familiar, Mr. Chairman. Carl Peter John for the record. A little bit of full disclosure here. A number of TIF subsidy proposals came up while I had the privilege of being on the commission, and it was originally set up as a tool to eliminate blight. I have a hard time finding where the blight is in the example we have today, and it is a tool as part of a number of others that were outlined here to basically subsidize development in certain areas. But I want to walk you down a little bit of history in terms of development, because you all can't have a say in CIDs. You can't have a say in star bonds. And if you don't take action today, you're limited, I believe, to 30 days, and the clock's just about run out in terms of TIF districts. This is the one area where you can have a say. And one of the concerns I had when I was on the commission was getting information about the performance of past TIF districts. Staff mentioned some of them, but there are actually quite a few in this community, and in parts of the country, like for instance in Chicago, they're very, very common. But I would mention a couple TIFs, some that the downtown TIF that occurred prior to me joining the commission at the end of 2008 was a 70% TIF, and the county didn't provide 100% exemption, and that was a tool that was used at that time. And I think Chairman Unruh would probably be the only one who was on the current commission who'd have any involvement in that at that point in time. I would point out that also this proposal we have here reminds me of the Ambassador Hotel proposal, when I believe Commissioner O'Donnell may have been on the City Council when that was considered in early 2012, and the portion of that proposal that required a charter ordinance. Excuse me, I'm thinking like a county commissioner and need to speak like a city council would pass a charter ordinance is subject to a protest petition. And there was a protest petition and a voter referendum was held, and the subsidy that was contained in that charter ordinance was rejected by the voters in February 2012. This county commission has adopted and approved, in the time when I was on it, I voted against the South Fork TIF at 135 and 47th Street South. And I would love to see an update on the financials on that. I don't think they've met the projections that were in place that they were intending. The Derby TIF, I jokingly said that the only blight that I found on that property, most of which was, the largest parcel of which was a wheat field, might have been wheat blight. It's still, last time I drove by that area is undeveloped. I defer to Commissioner Howell in terms of, I think he goes by there more frequently than I do. But there are a lot of other TIFs. There was one at 13th and Oliver. But I want to spend a little time to talk about one TIF that got rejected. It was in Plainview. There was a proposal to do a grocery store, and the TIF proposal came before this commission, and this commission, Chairman Unruh and myself were the only two people in this room who were on the commission at that time, but the commission voted 5-0 not to proceed. Interestingly enough, the developer denounced the entire county commission and left in a huff, but a couple of years later, a bigger project was built with a grocery store without any TIF subsidy. Now, I'm looking at this map and saying, gee, I'm trying to understand where the blight would be, but I think the real key is if you're going to do due diligence and exercise the responsibility that I think as elected officials should in terms of what's responsible for our community, I would urge you to get the data on past TIFs, look at the performance, and if the city governments are unwilling to provide them with you, basically let them know that at least in the area of TIFs, you're able to exercise a veto power by your action that you hear today. Now, I'm going to shift gears just a second because I'm a baseball fan. A lot of other folks I suspect in this room are too. And I'm going to mention just a wee bit of obscure baseball trivia. September 29th, 1957, a young 7-year-old got to go to his very second Major League Baseball game at the Polo Grounds in New York. It was the last home game that the New York Giants ever played in the Polo Grounds. At the end of that season, they ended up going off to San Francisco. The Dodgers left Brooklyn for L.A., and a lot of other changes occurred in baseball, and that was there. The reason I mentioned that was I was that 7-year-old, and baseball has been important. I think it's been important to a lot of towns, and I think it's important to Wichita. Now, interestingly enough, Major League Baseball arrived in Kansas City in the 1950s when the Athletics moved out of Philadelphia and came to Kansas City. Charlie Finley was the owner, rather controversial. I much preferred Ewing Kauffman, who ended up taking the Royals when that franchise was created after the Athletics bailed out for California less than 2 decades after they moved to Kansas City. Although, interestingly enough, the baseball history, Kansas City Monarchs and a number of other professional teams had a great history there. I mention this because this community, I think, sometimes suffers from an inferiority complex, and we have an incredible amount to offer. And to think that we have to offer a hugely subsidized development has me scratching my head. Now, I think it's arguable whether tearing down Lawrence Dumont Stadium is the equivalent of tearing down Fenway Park and Wrigley Field, or is it the equivalent of getting rid of, I'm going to mention a few stadiums that no longer exist, the Polo Grounds, Crosley Field in Cincinnati, Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. That's a decision that I'll leave you with, but in terms of subsidizing professional entertainment and basically providing special benefits for somebody from out of town who owns a baseball club. I didn't support TIFs in the past, and I'm not supporting them here today. Appreciate your time and attention. And stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
I see no questions, so thank you for your comments. Another speaker, Mr. Plummer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm Gary Plummer with the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'm pleased to say we're at 350 West Douglas in Wichita. On behalf of our 1,800 members, my board of directors, I just want to be here this morning to go on the record to let you know the Chamber supports this development plan that has been put together by the city. We think it's very innovative. We think they have taken a lot of steps to try to minimize the cost to the citizens. You know, another path to do a project of this magnitude could have been something on a ballot. And I want to compliment the vision of the mayor and the city council and their staff for trying to find some innovative ways to fund some public improvements in this district. I don't think subsidy is necessarily the appropriate word to use on this project, because the private development that's going to occur in that district will underwrite the revenues necessary to retire the bonds on public investment. As far as I know, there's not a direct benefit to any private investors with this TIF. And I think it's important to point out that if you've seen one TIF district, you've seen one TIF district, because I think every one of those projects can be very unique. And this is one that, from our view, is really structured in the appropriate fashion, because the incremental revenue is going towards public improvements. It's not going towards the benefit of any private developers, to the best of my knowledge. And it's being done in such a way that it limits the impact on the folks who do business in that district. You're not going to be paying extra sales tax to go to a ball game because of this star bond or TIF district. And so I just wanted to be here today to let you know that we think it's a transformational project for the future of Wichita. Certainly does a lot to activate the river in Wichita, which we think is admirable. And we would just ask you to consider it and hopefully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Plummer. I don't see anyone with questions, so we'll ask another speaker, Mr. Fleur.
Mr. Chairman, County Commission, City County Manager, good morning. Jeff Fleur with the Wichita Downtown Development Corporation at 507 East Douglas Avenue. Do appreciate the opportunity to express our support for this initiative or this item today. The TIF district, we believe actually as our board, will assist in the development of a world-class riverfront. It also will help us in, I think, further development of a distinctive riverfront. And why that's important is that if you look at river cities, and there's a limited list of them, you think of Louisville, Kentucky, Cincinnati, Ohio, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Pittsburgh, PA, or Pennsylvania, Nashville, Tennessee. Each of these cities have taken very great deliberate steps, if you will, to have a distinctive riverfront. And what that means is that helps in talent. There are even two cities that I'm aware of that have created waterfronts. Oklahoma City, which is now the Olympic rowing team area, and then also San Antonio took a drainage ditch to create the canal. Those two things were deliberately created for those two cities. So as we think about quality of life, and I echo what Mr. Plummer was saying, this is a very important amenity as we move forward in the development, not only of our riverfront, not only the development of our city, but also the development of our region. One of the things that we deal with downtown development, the Greater Wichita Partnership, is talent. So how is it that we get the talent for the companies here, not only that are here, but how do we help them expand, but new companies come in? So talent is that new economic commodity, if you will. So quality of place, quality of a riverfront does play into that. It does help us increase our competitiveness as we move forward in the economic development of our city and this region. So we believe it is an important step today to affirm this, not only for the continued development of Wichita, but also the 10-county region, and we believe the state as well.
Thank you, Mr. Fleur. I don't see anyone asking to speak, so thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Good morning. Scott Rigby with the City of Wichita. I'm Assistant City Manager. And thanks for the opportunity to share a few comments about this TIF proposal. As you know, the city is excited about this opportunity to redevelop the Lawrence Dumont Stadium. I know that gets a lot of attention, but this actual TIF district goes beyond just helping the stadium itself. The reason it jogs out to Seneca is because the Delano District neighborhood has asked us to look at how do we advance the Delano multi-use path, and that's why you'll see that go all the way over to Seneca to effectively accelerate that pathway development. Regarding star bonds, Mr. Commissioner, we did approve that last week. That is now up at the state for consideration. That will be contingent on their determination. We are hopeful that they'll take a positive view about that, and so we're excited about that. But altogether, this project to help redevelop the waterfront takes a combination of STAR, TIF, and city funds to make happen. And this is a lot of attention is just on the stadium, but is more than just about that. It's an opportunity to reinvigorate our waterfront, which has long been the back door to a lot of activities, some positive, some negative. If you think about the Riverfest activity, we're currently crammed into Douglas Street, and oftentimes the river, which is called Riverfest, is left behind. And those who can find their way back down to the riverfront see a little bit of activity. This way is an opportunity to, with the waterfront improvement that we're talking between the STAR and the TIF, is to energize that area. Delano is rapidly seeing a lot of activity, and with this new investment, we think that'll only accelerate. So happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. We do have a comment from Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Rigby, thank you for being here today. I appreciate taking the time to come over here and help explain some of this, because I always ask a lot of questions. First of all, let me ask, is there any plans to do any other types of financing for this district, like a CID in the future?
You know, that's a great question. We've had that in our early discussion about this idea. We looked at that, and at this time it has not been on the table, simply because the fact is it's an incremental. And unless you have a key incremental, I'll call it new development that would generate that, it's questionable. And then the second part is you have to have those property owners sign on board to that. That may be something a future developer who comes into the project may request. But as far as this project itself, we are not considering that this time.
Let me ask another question. So is the City of Wichita the owner of the facility? And it would be, let me make an example. Interest Bank Arena is technically owned by the county, but it's operated by a private organization that we contract with. So is that a model that you think is a good description of how this is going to be managed in the future, owned by the city and operated by someone else potentially?
It's a great question. The TIF that we're talking about, it does developments outside of what I'll call the Lawrence Dumont Stadium area, but the stadium itself and the property that was tied to the stadium would remain the city. Now, when we go through the development process, one of the things that we're looking for is how do we bring development up to, I'll call it for baseball or stadium, you could say, if the outfield fence lines, is how do we bring that up to the table? That may be a lease, that may be some future discussion to say there might be an opportunity to sell those properties for the right type of development. But at this time, the current site that where Lawrence Dumont and the stadium and the parking lots would remain city. Regarding if there's a lease option for the stadium itself, that would be contingent on if we have success in attracting affiliated baseball. And generally what they want to do is have a long-term lease to operate the facility with certain conditions.
This is probably going to be I'm not sure that you'll be able to answer this question totally, but again, I guess it seems to me that Mr. Shelton made the case there's the but-for question. If we don't provide the support for this, is there any backup plan on how this would go forward that you can think of?
The backup plan is very difficult, and it would really cause the city to pause and say, do we move forward at all with the project? I think the first step is what's the reaction from the state for the STAR bond? Obviously, that doesn't go forward. That's a major component of this. If, for example, the TIF is decided not to move forward, that would be, I'll call it a second strike. And really, we don't have the capability without those two components to move forward with this type of project.
Has the city considered, I know that they've done sales tax questions on ballots in the past, but is there any thought to doing a sales tax question like we did with Interest Bank Arena as a way to provide some funding for this?
Not that I'm aware of, but obviously I don't speak for the mayor or council on that.
And then finally, I guess my final question would be this. I understand that the clock doesn't start ticking until we have a project plan that's filed, and that begins the 20-year clock. And of course, that can happen again in the future, potentially, but we know there's a 20-year clock that starts when that project plan is filed. Is it the intention of the city that they will not file a project plan unless we have some type of a contract with a AAA minor league baseball, professional baseball team? In other words, we're not going to start this TIF and do all this development without some type of a commitment from a team that would be, I guess, the hook for the stadium. Is that true?
You know, the mayor and the council have having those discussions with, I'll call it, baseball operations. So I can't really respond to that, but I know he's been having good discussions with that. The goal right now is if, for example, the Star Bond is approved and the TIF is able to move forward, that we would start earnestly preparing that detailed project plan. It's a question of what comes first. Does the development team come first, or does the city initiate some of these public improvements? And what we're hearing from the development community is they want to see, is the city truly committed to moving forward the project? They want to see those initial first hard steps. It's great to talk a plan and things on a paper, but is the city undertaking, I'll call it, construction efforts to hire a design team to identify? One of the aspects we'll be looking for in the RFQ going out to the development community is, in the design community, is where are the developable parcels and what is their interest in this? They're looking for us to lay out the vision and plan, but really more than that is when is the city first going to put the shovel in the ground? So our current plan is to move in earnest, and as that works, concurrently we'll be having discussions with developers as well as affiliated baseball. And just to qualifying to that, a lot of people just focus, is this a baseball? But it's a multi-sport facility. In order to do Star Bonds, you have to have a multi-sport facility. So this isn't just a baseball, although that might be the predominant use. It'll be designed for soccer and for other uses, concerts, community events. If you think of, they just did one back in the Boston area where the mayor talks about it's a community park, where there happens to have a baseball game or has to have a soccer game, but it's really a community amenity. So how do we activate this area, not just for the 60 days of baseball or the 20 games for soccer, but how does the community have an opportunity to utilize that asset that's a pride to the community?
Well, very good. I appreciate your answers, and that's just thank you for taking those questions and doing your best to answer them. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a comment from Commissioner Renzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Reeve, you almost answered the question that I had. I had heard some information. I wanted to clarify that this is multi-use. You're going to have soccer, for example.
Correct.
Is that
correct?
Yeah,
by state law, for Star Bonds, you have to have a multi-sport facility. It can't be a single sport. So it could be soccer, it could be baseball, it could be lacrosse, it could be, we've had people approach us about motocross in there, even drone racing. I'm not familiar with that, but different uses within that facility. It could be for 5Ks, starting an Indy for 5Ks or Ironman opportunities, or it could be concerts or other festivals that the city is interested in doing.
Okay, with respect to soccer, what sort of soccer events would be held there?
Soccer games themselves. For example, Tulsa, with their stadium, is set up for both baseball and soccer. So it reconfigures during the off days for a soccer game, and then the next day or the next few days it goes back to baseball. They have concerts down there. They have other activities as well.
Well, specifically, I've been told, I'm trying to look at what type of soccer games. I understand soccer games, but I've been told there's some sort of, I don't know if it's an event or something that has some soccer games happening out at the Stryker complex that might move there. Is that true?
So currently Stryker, which is for Star Bonds, we just had Star Bonds approved for Stryker, is focused on youth sports. There is currently I'll call it a minor league team called FC Wichita that currently uses the existing small stadium out there to use their fields. It's a question whether they'll remain there or not. It may be an opportunity for them to move down to here. We just simply don't know. And hopefully with a new facility like this, it would also attract maybe an enhanced level of professional soccer or other activities.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see anyone with more questions, so Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. If you'd state your name, we'd appreciate that.
Kevin Jinks, National Baseball Congress, NBC World Series, 110 South Main, Suite 600. Chairman, commissioners, county leaders, I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you and express my support of not only a new stadium, a new multi-faceted stadium to be built in the Delano area in this district we were talking about, but certainly the support of what it can mean to not only the county, but certainly our community and our state. From what I understand, part of this this proposal is that 50% of the attendees for the museum that is also being spoken to be a part of this the Star Bond has to be outside visitors from outside a 100-mile radius of Wichita. So not only are we talking about our community of Wichita and Sedgwick County have the opportunity to use this facility for multiple events, but certainly for visitors to come into our community. And with the work of Visit Wichita, who we partner with, that is something that we strive for every year with the NBC World Series. The National Baseball Congress has been a part of our community since 1931. The NBC World Series is the largest and longest standing and running event, sporting event in the United States. Nothing comes close to our 2-week event that has been played every year since 1935. I know those are a lot of numbers and dates and things such as that. We struggle with attendance because of the amenities of our stadium at this time. We don't meet all the American Disabilities Act requirements. That is sad because we have a lot of fans that are needing those types of requirements to get around our stadium. We don't have the opportunities for people to be able to still watch the game but go to the concession stand or go to the restroom or just walk around. We want to be able to provide fans a great event, a memorable event. The opportunity to go, yeah, there was a baseball game going on, but I also got to see my kids roll down a hill, a grass hill. And those are some of just the few amenities that we're talking about. I speak here with a lot of passion. I have the humble and honorable task of working on this event and working with the National Baseball Congress on a daily basis. So I'm probably speaking at a level here that not everyone can understand. But we have been a part of our community for a very long time, and we struggle with the current amenities that we face. On behalf of our board of directors of a nonprofit organization, I ask for your support for this TIF, because not only does it impact the organization that I work for, but it impacts our city, our community, our county, and our state and our region. And also with the addition of the potential of having the Collegiate Baseball Hall of Fame join the NBC Hall of Fame and the other sports that we're talking about, it creates a lot of energy. I believe it is time for our community to step up and catch up with other communities in our region. And we ask for your support to go forward with this, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any questions, so thank you. Does anyone else wants to speak at this time? I see some familiar faces that sometimes speak, but no, not today. All right. Okay, we will now, I guess, restrict the conversation to the bench and ask commissioners if they have comments or direction here. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you. Just a couple questions about the adverse effects. Thanks for coming back up. I probably should have asked these earlier, but some of them came up as a result of some of the comments. When we're making the decision, we're supposed to base our decision based on those adverse effects that you briefed us on, correct?
Right.
Okay. Is past performance of TIFs throughout the Wichita area, is that one of our considerations?
Not in looking at the specific proposal before you.
So we're just looking at this one TIF. We're not supposed to be considering TIFs that have already taken place.
Not according to that policy.
There was also some criticism on whether or not that the baseball stadium decision was wise decision. Is our decision here, should we be looking at second-guessing what the city council does on whether or not that they think that a baseball stadium is the right decision or not? Is that part of our decision-making process?
I think that from my perspective, the decision that we're providing the information that if these assumptions are met, does this deal make sense from the numbers? That's what I'm trying to do. So I guess if there's a definite use and the numbers work, then that would be, I guess the specific use isn't something. One example that we had years ago was a proposed TIF in West Wichita that would have been a direct competitor with other businesses in town, and so that was taken into consideration at that time.
Okay, as a baseball stadium, do you think that that's a direct competitor against anything else in Wichita right now?
I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have right now.
Commissioner, if I may specifically address some of the questions you asked Mr. Shelton. Not only is it, it's by statute you are supposed to consider this specific proposal on its own. In other words, you cannot consider past performance as part of it. You have to look at each one, at each proposed district on its own, through the factors. Part of the reason I believe we have the policy is because there's not a whole lot of guidance in case law or Attorney General opinions on this particular subject. We have a policy that basically outlines the things we are to consider for each individual project that goes along with the state statute that says you are only to consider what's in the proposal, not anything outside of the proposal when it comes to that adverse finding. In other words, you can find within the proposal where things specifically would be adverse to the county, but you cannot consider prior TIF proposals and their performance when approved as a consideration. You have to consider each specific one on its own. So in this case, those exterior factors would not be a consideration here and cannot be a consideration here by statute.
Can you provide the statute language that says that specifically?
I can provide it to you. I can provide it to you after the meeting if you'd like. I literally have read each district is supposed to be considered on its own by statute. If you would like, I can go grab the statute and bring it back and quote it to you. But I have read the statute multiple times. And
I would like to have some of that. I guess this may be a part of semantics, I guess, but we're here to consider a TIF district. A TIF district. It is
Commissioner, I would say, correction, this TIF district.
Correct.
Not a TIF, this one.
And we need, in order to make an informed decision for our constituents, we need to understand how TIF districts affect the entire community. So having an understanding of TIF districts, perhaps research associated with TIF districts to understand the negative impact it could have, is imperative for us to understand. If we don't understand TIF districts and the possibilities that may occur as a result of this, we cannot say one way or another whether or not it's going to have adverse effect or not. So if I have some research here with respect to TIF districts and how they affect community.
Commissioner, I would caution you that considering that goes down a very dark and dangerous path for the county.
I would like to see some specific language that says that.
I can go right back to my office and
I will not be doing my due diligence if I disregard the effect of TIF districts on our entire community.
Commissioner,
that's what I'm
the statute is specific. You can only consider what's this proposal, not anything associated with anything outside of this proposal.
I am going to consider this TIF district, and I will consider the TIF district, the effects it will have on our community.
If I don't have any other questions, if you'll excuse me, I'll go get the statutory language for you.
Do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there other comment or question? Commissioner Ransall?
Yeah, Brent, you can just confirm this. I want to clarify. Well, first of all, I want to say we've had people speak here today on behalf of this that have, or in support of and opposition to, that both brought up the importance of a baseball stadium. Once again, it's good to discuss that, but our intent here is not to decide whether or not we support a baseball stadium per se, but whether or not we support one particular proposed financing aspect of this proposal and whether or not it brings harm to the county. We may find that it does or does not bring harm to the county. It doesn't mean one way or the other how we feel about a baseball stadium. I know there's strong emotions out there about whether or not we need a baseball stadium. I understand that, but that's not the point. But over the life of this, we're expected, it'll be about $11 million from the county that will be used to help pay for this project. And I know you probably don't have the exact number, but a similar amount from the school district.
Be a little bit more from the school
district. A little
district.
bit more. That's right, because their mill levy
right.
is higher, but some of it is exempt, some of it isn't.
Right, the 20 mills is exempt.
It'll be close to that. Okay. Well, I do think it's important to understand. I mean, the question that we have here is, will this TIF financing bring harm to the county? We're having an adverse funding and an ability to provide services. And part of the premise, as I stated earlier, is that having this sort of funding will create new economic development that will create new income taxes that would not have existed before. But that assumes that it will not have a negative impact on anything outside that TIF district. Because if it increases taxes inside but it hurts everything outside of it and we lose money there, that has an adverse effect. I think it's important for us to know as commissioners to know if that's the case. And there's also the argument about but for that if we don't do this, nothing else will happen, etc. I do have some research here that's been done on TIF districts in the past. One of them is about employment, which is not being alleged here, but it says the result is consistent with any employment increase within TIF district coming at the expense of lower employment outside the district. But the main one I want to talk about is one that talks about two different projects. Because you see, TIF districts have been around for decades and used more extensively in other areas, and there's been started to do some research to see what the effect is. And I'm going to read some of this, and I want some people to know that I'm just reading what was on here. These aren't my words. They may be somewhat, I mean, they're strongly worded words here, but this is about two research projects. And one of them said the study said that there was an offset that came from smaller growth. They acknowledged growth inside the TIF area, but he said there's an offset that came from smaller growth in the non-TIF area of the municipality. He says, our findings were a surprise to those, especially non-academics, who naively have inferred TIF caused growth by observing growth within the TIF district. Our findings are quite threatening to those who have an interest in TIF, such as local economic development officers who spend the earmarked funds, or TIF consultants who are paid for documenting the findings of blight or but for. Commercial and industrial TIF districts both show a significant negative impact on growth in commercial assessed values outside the district. He goes on to say, again, there is a significant cannibalization of commercial assessed values outside the TIF district from commercial development within the TIF district. So you're increasing the assessed value here, but you're decreasing it everywhere else. So as far as the county is concerned, it's a zero-sum game. We end up spending $11 million to help subsidize or pay for this thing that we could have used to provide services, EMS, police, fire, what else? It says tax increment finding is a luring tool. TIF districts grow much faster than other areas in their host municipalities. TIF boosters or naive analysts might point to this as evidence of the success of tax increment financing, but they would be wrong. We find evidence that non-TIF areas of municipalities that use TIF grow more rapidly and perhaps more slowly than similar municipalities that do not use TIF. Our evidence shows that commercial TIF districts reduce commercial property value growth in the non-TIF part of the same municipality. That is to say, if you subsidize one store in one location, there will be less demand to have a store in another location. I think it's important to understand the instrument of financing that is being contemplated here, particularly since there are other forms of financing that could be used that would not have the same impact on assessed values, or would not have cause the same loss of property taxes to the county and the school district for that matter. There's a variety of them. I don't need to list them all, but nevertheless, that's a concern that I think for us to honestly consider whether or not this will have a TIF district, we need to understand how TIF districts affect communities in general. Now, if there's evidence to suggest that this TIF district is somehow different and can defy the laws of economics, so to speak, then I want to entertain that and consider that. There's some debate. It's important to remember this is a retail TIF, not a industrial TIF. The research seems to indicate that the same does not happen for industrial TIFs as opposed to commercial TIFs or retail TIFs. So that they differentiate there. And so I want to remind commissioners that by the end of this, we're going to be contributing over $800,000 a year to the baseball stadium that we could be using for EMS, police, whatever. I don't think that's a trivial amount. I personally like I guess I have to disagree with one person. I think CID is a better way to do it because that's a tax right there at the facility, so the people that are using it are actually paying for it, and it doesn't take property tax values from the county or the school district. You could also just use general fund revenue to do it or whatever. But nevertheless, this is an important factor, I think, that we should take into account so that we can fully assess whether or not it'll have a positive or negative effect overall in the county in the long run. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've spent a lot of time on this, studying this for quite a while, asking a lot of questions, and I even asked more questions today. I guess I have one question for Mr. Sheldon, if he doesn't mind that before I make a further comment. But Mr. Sheldon, when you and I spoke earlier, we talked about the aspect of blight being a requirement for a TIF, but someone used the word enterprise zone as an alternate subject to a way to look at an area that would also qualify an area for a TIF district. Is that true? Can you please explain that?
That's correct. And the enterprise zone definition that's spelled out in state statute is one of the criteria that makes an area TIF eligible. Enterprise zone maps were developed prior to 1992, and the entirety of this geographic area falls within the enterprise zones across the city of Wichita.
Okay, and that's important to me because some of the TIFs that were mentioned by one of the former speakers, he mentioned one in Derby. Again, I'm not going to use this as my as something that's going to affect my decision today. But just to make a point, this wheat field is right next to my house, and I go past it multiple times every day. And I think this is just a good example of kind of an abuse of this type of tool. This is one where I don't think this makes sense, and just let me explain why. This is one that would actually encourage a Menards, which I love Menards. I actually sometimes will travel from Derby all the way to North Wichita to go to a Menards because they've got something that I want. It would be convenient for a Menards to be right next to my house, but there is a Lowe's right there, and that's part of the problem. This is a free enterprise, free market issue where that particular TIF that is in Derby would benefit a specific retailer by improving drainage and landscaping and road access for their own business. And the Lowe's right across the street from that did not get any of that type of special treatment. So that's where I think TIFs get kind of a bad name. That is where I think some of them are kind of in that camp, and some of them might be in this camp. Let me explain further. And again, when I was running for this seat, I was asked a lot about my opinion on on these different types of incentives. Of course, I know that we don't have a voice on a lot of these things that might be done by cities, and that was a point that one of the speakers made, but we do have a voice on TIF districts. And so in keeping my promise, I wanted to know, I just want the people to know, my constituents and the people that are listening, that I'm doing my best to keep my promise and to be thoughtful, to very carefully analyze each TIF district independently, I think as was suggested by our counselor, regardless of what other TIF districts may do. To me, this one is different in a number of ways. First of all, I don't think there's anybody within this district that's going to have any abatement on taxes. Everybody that's in this district will collect the same taxes or pay the same taxes that they would whether this district existed or not.
That's true.
So there's not in some places around the city there might be an abatement of taxes that would encourage someone to come in, or it might be a direct benefit to a specific business. And I don't think I see that in this case. I don't think there's any of the businesses that might develop along these undeveloped areas are going to have some type of a pass on paying their property taxes or any type of changes in their sales tax collection. So to me, that is a very important thing. What also makes this different is because it's the city of Wichita is going to own this facility. Most of the money, almost all of it's going towards parking and the stadium, which will be used by the community for a number of things, as you just mentioned earlier. A small amount of this money will go towards a multimodal path along Douglas, if I understand correctly. About $3 million total for the infrastructure in that pathway. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's just a block north of Douglas on Pearl Street.
Right. So most of this is not for a specific business or any type of pass on taxes, and so everyone's going to pay their, the normal fair share of taxes. But the money will be collected by the city to pay for this. And I would just reflect once again on the Interest Bank Arena. The people did vote for that. I think today to imagine the city of Wichita without the Interest Bank Arena doesn't seem like a thing I think a lot of us would support. I think we all kind of like the arena there, and we enjoy what it provides. We've had a lot of discussion since I've been on this commission about quality of life and about how quality of life is important for this community. And I think this is one of those things that people want things to do. They want things to enjoy. And this is not a private business. This is a government-owned, taxpayer-owned facility for all citizens to use. And I don't see that this is any different really than the Interest Bank Arena. It's just a different way of collecting the revenue to pay for it is really what we're discussing today. Regarding the 5 things you mentioned in terms of the county policy considerations, I have spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I've gone very in depth, even on my own, trying to really analyze what the answers to those questions. And let me just quickly say, again, I'm not sure that I don't want to repeat anything that's been said before, but our base property taxes will continue to flow to the county. What we're giving up potentially is the growth in those base taxes over the period of the TIF district, which right now is estimated to be around $500,000, excuse me, or about $25,000 a year. That's on average. Now, of course, that's probably going to be a ramping effect, so it won't be necessarily $25,000 a year, but over time, the average is $25,000 a year. That is, my opinion, not. All tax dollars are precious, but that's not a lot of money considering how much money we spend over 20 years overall between the city of Wichita and the county and the school district. It's a fairly small amount of taxes. And then our investment in this really is the potential $11 million worth of lost revenue should this go forward. And I think that you made a point, and I think I believe this is true. I've talked to a number of people. The but-for in this case is real. I don't think there's any way this will go forward without the county support. So the $11 million is only going to happen if this project moves forward. Otherwise, there's no chance we would ever collect $11 million in tax revenue over 20 years by voting no and turning this down. That option, I don't think is a real option for us. And so that $11 million would only will only be something that's in play should this project move forward. And having said that, someday down the road, this will go back on the county roll. I mean, I know they can reset the clock, but eventually, maybe when I'm dead, this project eventually will go back on the tax roll, and at that point, it is a benefit to the county. In terms of county expenses, it depends on how you count them, but I think we have around 46 different agency separations within our county government. Again, it depends on how you count them. But looking at those very closely, most of them I don't think are going to have any adverse effect or any increased cost, and if there is an increased cost, for example, EMS, potentially, maybe more calls, because there's more people in this area, but that's fee funded. And that fee funding pays for the cost of that service. And so looking at everything else on this list, the zoo might benefit potentially. Exploration Place might benefit because it's close to the district. But in terms of costs, I can't see anything on this list that's going to have an adverse, higher cost of government because of this district. And let me make a couple of examples. The sheriff does not do patrolling in this area. They generally patrol areas outside the city. Fire District Number 1 does not fight fires inside this area. They generally focus on areas outside the city. They might provide some mutual aid into the city, but not generally downtown. And so it goes. I don't see that we have any expenses that are to speak of. In terms of benefits, it's possible that property taxes around this would stay neutral, but it's also possible that the property taxes around this district would increase, which, if that happened, would be a benefit. I'm looking at Interest Bank Arena as an example. I've had discussion with the county appraiser, and it sounds like property taxes did go up some. Whether that's a result of the Interest Bank Arena or not, I don't know, but the reality is I don't think we're going to see a reduction in property tax revenue. But I'll just say there's also potentially some jobs. There's income taxes. There's sales taxes potentially collected outside the district. There's a number of things that will happen in the community potentially because of this existing that could eventually benefit the county over time. So I guess in terms of county benefits, I don't think it's less than zero. It's either zero or positive, more than likely a positive number to the county, even though we don't collect property taxes and the increment or the extra or the sales taxes. I think that overall the county's going to have benefits, and certainly when these districts expire, that would also be true. In terms of risk, I think is another great comment. The risk is to the city. Should this project not pan out the way they think it will, we don't hold those bonds. We don't have the obligation to pay the debt service. The city would. So I don't see that we have a risk financially to support them. And then I do think that it's important to say we want to be good partners with our friends across the street. Did they vote 7-0 on this? Is that what it was?
6-1.
6-1. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that I believe that home rule is a thing we ought to be sensitive to, the fact that the city has a desire to do this and it's in the heart of the city, I think we ought to support them if we possibly can. And since there's no detriment to the county that I can find potentially a benefit to the county, I would like to support Wichita based on those reasons. And I think that their home rule decision ought to be something significant for us to look at. I would say that in terms of shifting jobs, again, I've heard the discussions about how TIF districts might actually work inside the district, but there's actually detriment happens outside the district because of the way the economy works. Jobs might be created in the district, but you have lost jobs outside the district. Again, I think in some TIFs and some of these types of tools, that may be true, probably is true. But in this case, I don't see how that's true because who's going to lose jobs? I don't see that there's going to be a shifting of people spending money or doing less things outside the district that they're doing now. I think it just provides a new opportunity. So I don't see a shifting of jobs or a shifting of economic spending. That may be true in many other cases, but I don't think it's true in this case. And then, let's see. I guess my final comment, we're building the law enforcement training center. There was a issue a while back about the interest on the development of that law enforcement training center. We generously decided to cover the $400,000 in cost to the city. I think it was very nice that we did that. We're good partners with them. And that was $400,000. We took that out of our budget right now, and that was $400,000. We're talking about potentially giving up $500,000 over 20 years. Keep that in perspective. You got to keep all this kind of in mind. And so I guess my thought is that this is one with thoughtful analysis and very careful consideration. I know I've asked a ton of questions. I don't mean to be, some people might use the word anal or whatever. I'm not trying to be that way, but I'm being very thoughtful and very careful. And I think this one stands up. And to the extent that I think that our counselor also said we must have a reason for the adverse finding, I don't think I have an adverse finding in this case. If I had one, maybe we could talk about voting no, but I can't find an adverse finding. It's all speculative that it's based on, I think, the bad tips or the bad tools that may be used in the past. In this particular case, I can't find anything that's been proposed that's adverse to the county, and therefore I will be supporting approving this TIF district today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Renzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just clarify. There's going to be how much? But $50 million of retail and office space and investment in that area. Is that right?
The projection is for a $50 million development on the Catalyst site, and then additional development over the next 10 or 15 years thereafter.
Okay. So let me clarify for the Commissioner. First of all, it's not $500,000 over 20 years. It's $11 million that we'll be losing, up to about $8 million by the end. And how we do that is that retail and office space that is being developed there, that will compete with areas outside, and that's how you will lose your property values, your taxes, etc., because it'll harm other places. Now, the fact is, however, in TIFs, generally what happens is developers have specials and they have property taxes, and a lot of times those property taxes that they pay are then redirected to help pay for specials, and so they don't really have to pay the specials directly. I think it's important to note that, as staff said, we don't have enough data right now to analyze whether or not the equity funding is adequate. We don't even know to what details developers may benefit from this. We don't know what kind of specials may be paid for, etc., because we don't have that information. That's typically how it works, but nevertheless, there will be $50 million of retail that will be subsidized that will compete with all other retails within our community. That's how that happens. And we can attempt to deny that, but that's the reality of the situation. And I think that's important to take into consideration. And I will say, for the record, I've not had any meetings with any developer within this community who may or may not benefit from this project in the future. I'm just speaking for me personally.
Is that all, Commissioner, for now? Okay, thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay, if you'd like to. Mr. Vanachin, would you like to resolve the question that's left unanswered at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, my apologies. My job is to provide legal counsel to this board and in many ways to protect it. And when I think there's an action that you're going to take that's adverse, I think I've told you in the past, that's when you're going to see me vehemently say no. The statute in question is K.S.A. 12-1771, subsection D. No privately owned property subject to ad valorem taxes shall be acquired and redeveloped under the provisions of K.S.A. 12-1770, which is acquired by the redevelopment district. If the Board of County Commissioners or the Board of Education levying taxes on such property determines by resolution adopted within 30 days following the conclusion of the hearing for the establishment of the redevelopment district or bioscience development district required by subsection B of that statute, that the proposed redevelopment district or bioscience development district will have an adverse effect on such county or school district. The Board of County Commissioners or the Board of Education shall deliver a copy of the resolution to the city, and the city shall, within 30 days of receipt of that resolution, pass an ordinance terminating the redevelopment district. The key part of that is that the proposed redevelopment district, that language talks specifically to the district that is presented before you. I believe if you're looking for the potential for adverse findings, Mr. Shelton has provided you enough information that you could look at within the project itself. There are some questions. Those questions are at this point unanswered. There is a very real possibility that this doesn't take off the way it's expected to take off. There is possibility there's other development in Delano not related to the district that the county will be foregoing. These are all things to consider about the project itself. And within that, I think if you're looking for something, there may be something contained within there. But if you're looking for past performance, I think that is clearly outside of the scope of consideration for this item. So it is entirely a policy decision on your part whether or not to consent or to make an adverse finding or to take no action. My consideration here is to provide legal counsel to the board, and I think considering anything outside of the project itself and outside of the policy we've established to evaluate those projects presents the potential for an argument that the action's arbitrary and capricious, and that would subject us to the potential of lawsuit from anybody involved in the project, which would include the city.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
So, just to clarify, I think you've basically said, I mean, what I have proposed is that I think it's important to understand objective data and research with that talks about the nature of TIF districts in general and how it might apply to this particular situation. And from what I hear, there is no specific prohibition from that as I understood. And I thank you for clarifying that.
I appreciate the question, and I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of the information, because that's what we've done with our policy, information that's been provided to us in the past to do an evaluation. If you're looking at it from that perspective and saying we don't have as much information as we had with other TIF districts, that's been made it more difficult to evaluate those districts, and to look at it from that perspective, that you don't have the information the complete information that we've outlined in the policy, and that weighs into your adverse finding, then I think that's wholly within your purview to do. If you're going to compare TIF to TIF, I think that falls outside of what you're able to do. But if you're looking at the I guess the old line, past performance is not an indication of future results. When you're talking about a TIF, that's completely true, because you're talking about that one project. But if you're looking at it from a perspective of we don't have enough information, we've been provided information in the past, and that's part of the decision, then I think you're fine on that one.
Mr. Yo, do you have anything to add?
Commissioner, Mr. Von Atchen has researched this. I don't necessarily disagree with his basic statement, but I also know as a former policymaker that I was allowed, and you're allowed to draw on your own common knowledge and experience, life experience. I would suggest that if you're concerned about success or failure of previous TIFs, that not necessarily be part of your findings, but I think it maybe goes too far to say you can't even think about it, but I think you can. But I think as far as the findings you need to make, I think they're set out in the statute.
Thank you, Mr. Counselor. All right, at this time, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the speakers that came out today. I am very excited about this project. Just a little bit of clarification, just so everyone knows, because I know a lot about star bonds from being over the state, but they take the additional revenue, so they won't take all of the sales tax revenue once the district is formed. So it's anything additional, much like a TIF. It won't take the existing property taxes, only additional. So the county will not risk losing any money if this development fails or if no development even occurs. I think this gives the city an opportunity to try to do something different. I've never voted for a TIF district. I've argued against them even up here at the county when there was a bowling alley a few years ago that was being discussed that unfortunately the city council at the time that I was on approved. But I don't think we should be looking at this issue through an ideological lens, but actually what the project's doing. And I know that Gary Plummer mentioned the word transformational. That's the word that I've been using about this, so we are definitely in sync on that, Mr. Plummer. But I do believe that Wichita is at a critical time right now that we're trying to create a new identity. We are trying to retain our youth, our resources, which is going to benefit all of our employers that we're fortunate enough to have. So having a project like this is great for the future of Wichita. It's necessary. And it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the leadership of Mayor Longwell and the City Council. We've desperately needed a good mayor in Wichita for a long time, and we have one. And we have a strong city council right now that have vetted this project. And I want to be partners with Wichita. That was a common theme through my campaign. I know it was a theme through the campaign of Commissioner Dennis as well, to be good partners with Wichita. This is a great opportunity to do that. It's a great opportunity to acknowledge the visionary leadership of Mayor Longwell. And I also somewhat get concerned that we try to meddle too much in other people's business. So we get mad when the federal government tries to meddle in the state and local business. We get mad when the state tries to meddle in our business, or even up to the federal government. One of the items that we can take up today is no action, and I think that we need to stop this process of telling the city, yes, we approve or we don't approve of what you do. I don't think it's necessary for us to vote on this project today, though I am supportive of it, because I think the city is responsible, just like they are with the Star Bond District, just like they are with IRBs and many other functions that the city has. I don't believe that we need to take action on this to let it go through. And I think that our counselor has given us that option as well, that we don't need to take action on it, though I am supportive of the project, Mr. Chair, and so when the time comes, I'll be happy to make a motion.
I think we've had lots of input and conversation, Commissioners, so now would be an appropriate time.
All right. Well, Mr. Rios, if it's appropriate, I'll go with option number 3, which just says the Commission won't take any action and allow the TIF district to take effect, and support our friends at the City of Wichita with that motion.
I will second. And comment on the motion, Commissioner Ranzau.
Well, I won't be supportive of this motion for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm all for being good partners, but sometimes in politics, being good partners is used as a euphemism of spending taxpayer dollars in a way that may not be in their best interest. And that's disappointing. We are, by legal statute, have the authority, unlike some of the other sort of incentives, we don't have the authority to have any say. We're exercising authority under statute to vote yes or vote no. I think it's important to do that. And once again, with there's discussion here about whether or not we'll actually lose out on revenue in other places. I think it's very clear that we will, with $50 million of retail, that will compete with other things. I think it's important to point out, well, one of the things they want to do is, and I was briefed on this, is soccer. And one of the things that might happen is soccer stuff from another place at Stryker, which was also subsidized by a Star Bond, might be moved to another one. So that's part of the plan, to essentially cannibalize some things. And so to deny that is I don't think we should do. I'm going to make a substitute motion that we find that this action does have an adverse effect on the county for the following reasons. Number one, the TIF district will likely cannibalize assessed value outside the district, and that would make the cost of the county greater than the benefit. Number two, that the cannibalization would lead to decreased revenue and ability to provide for essential services. Meanwhile, number three, there are other less harmful ways to finance this plan. And number four, we lack sufficient detail and data to determine if equity funding is sufficient to affect default risk.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a fairly long motion. You know, out of respect and out of respect for my colleague, I'm going to second this, but I'm going to vote no, just because I think he ought to have a vote today. I don't agree with the premise of the motion, but I do think having a vote is important. And so, assuming that this motion fails, I'll make an alternate substitute motion here in just a moment. We would vote by simple majority to approve the TIF. That'll be my next motion. And I'll explain my reasoning why when we get to that. But for right now, I will go ahead and second the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Ranzau.
I just want to say I appreciate my colleague's willingness to second my motion, even if he may oppose it. I do appreciate that. I think it's important to have the discussion and to have the debate, and we'll have a vote on it. And let me reiterate one more time, as someone who grew up watching the Royals and who spent many times at WSU baseball games watching thousands of people there, for me, this is not about baseball, good, bad, or indifferent. It's about this particular form of financing, and is this the best way to do it? And I believe, as I stated earlier, that I don't believe that it is.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Commissioner Ranzau's passion on this subject. I will not be supporting your motion. This morning, the chairman and I had an opportunity, along with the county manager, to go out and listen to Dr. Bardot speak out at WSU. And one of the things he talked about this morning, and I think it was very timely, is the transformation that's happening here in the city of Wichita. And that transformation that's happening in the city of Wichita is really looking at a couple areas. One, obviously, is the innovative campus, because that's what he's deeply involved in. But the second thing that's transformational that's happening in the city of Wichita, which I think is a direct result of our current leadership that we've got over in City Hall, is the development that is happening downtown, and especially the development that we're looking at right now along the riverfront. That's why I will definitely be supporting one of the two motions that comes up. Well, see what happens here at the end. But I won't be supporting Commissioner Ranzau's motion at this time. I think that we are in a transformational period. I appreciate the comments that I heard this morning from Dr. Bardot, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the future with the city of Wichita. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion and a second. I see no one else asking to speak, so Madam Clerk, will you call the vote on the substitute motion?
Commissioner Dennis?
No.
Commissioner Ranzau?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
No.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
No.
Chairman Unruh?
No. So the substitute fails, and at this point, we're back at the underlying motion. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to say, letting this go into effect without a vote, in my opinion, is not totally transparent, in my opinion. If we're going to support this, we ought to vote and stand up proudly and explain our vote. And I think that's a better option. So I'd like to make a substitute motion. And there have been people in the past that said, I've never voted for a TIF district, but they have supported it by letting them go into effect. And to me, that's not exactly what that implies when you say I didn't vote for a TIF district, but yet you supported it by letting it go into effect. And I'm not saying that. I don't know when that may have happened. I'm not accusing anybody particularly over that, but I just think that's an opportunity for that to happen. I think it'd be much more transparent for us to go ahead and clarify our support or opposition to the TIF district. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we would approve the TIF district. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you. Substitute motion and second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, call the vote on the substitute motion.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranzau?
No.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh?
Aye. Substitute motion passes that we are approving the TIF district. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I meant to say this during when I was making my motion, but just in case someone thinks I have done this for personal reasons, I don't receive campaign contributions from anybody. I'm not personal friends with anybody. In fact, I don't even like baseball. So, having said that, that's really not it. So if anybody thinks I'm doing this for some personal reason, that's not true. And maybe I'll get to learn to like baseball down the road, but right now that has nothing to do with my support today. I'm just doing my analysis and doing this based on the things I've already articulated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. I believe we're ready for the next item. Commissioners, before I have the clerk call it, we've been here for 2.5 hours. The next item should go relatively quickly. But does the board, would they like to take a 5-minute break? I don't see anybody asking for it, so we will carry on. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Item G, consideration of grant application to the Wichita Area Metropolitan Planning Organization in the amount of $97,015 for the funding of medical and social services transportation for seniors and individuals with disabilities.
Good morning, Commissioners. Annette Graham, Division of Aging. What I bring before you today is a one-year grant application that would provide medical and social service transportation for seniors and individuals with disabilities living in the urbanized communities in Sedgwick County. The program's service areas would include the cities of K.S.A, Valley Center, Mays, Goddard, Hayesville, Derby, Mulvane, Bel Air, and Park City, and then the unincorporated areas of Furley and Schulte. The grant application is due on May 19th. The total program costs for this are $136,489. The attached grant applications for Sedgwick County provide for Federal Transit Administration funding for operations, vehicle acquisition, and contracted rides. Sedgwick County Transportation will be responsible for matching funds for the operations and contractual portions of the grant, and Fleet Reserve funds will provide the match for the vehicle portion of the grant. KDOT will pay the vehicle acquisition grant funds directly to the approved vendor, and the vehicle will be titled to Sedgwick County and maintained by County Fleet. Included in this grant is the operations grant proposal, which includes one full-time driver position to the staffing table at a total cost of $40,232, which includes salary and estimated benefits. In this, there are 3 separate grant applications. One is for the operations, and that has a 50-50 match. The federal funds would be $23,573, and the match of the same. The vehicle acquisition is 85-15% match, with federal funds of $33,441.55, and the match of $5,901.45. For the contractuals, it's an 80-20 match, and so that's $40,000 federal dollars and $10,000 match, for the total of the grant amount of $97,114.55. The grant period would begin January 1st, 2018, and would go through December 31st, 2018. We would anticipate providing 10,929 rides in 2018 with these funds. And as you might recall, these services to those areas outside the Wichita city limits, those urbanized areas, was decreased by some changes in funding about 1.5 years ago, and then also when the Red Cross transportation program ended last June. There was some decrease in these. These are rides that are medical and social services, really targeting those seniors and individuals with physical disabilities. These are populations that we see growing in our community, and also these unmet needs continue to be identified. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions, but request you approve the grant application and authorize the chairman to sign the 3 grant application documents.
Thank you, Annette. We do have a question from Commissioner Howell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have much of a question, but I just wanted to say I appreciate the presentation, and I do support the effort to do this, and I would like to make a motion that we would approve the grant application and authorize the chairman to sign the 3 grant application documents, and if awarded, authorize the acceptance of the grant and establish new internal order for budget authority as outlined in the budget authority adjustment section of this request, and establish a new 1 FTE driver position as outlined in the personnel considerations section of this item. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, call the vote, please.
Commissioner Dennis.
Aye.
Commissioner Ransaw.
Aye.
Commissioner Howell.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Chairman Unruh.
Aye. Thank you, Annette. Next item, please.
Item H, report of the Board of Bids and Contracts regular meeting on May 4, 2017.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Joe Thomas, Purchasing Director. The meeting of the Board of Bids and Contracts that was held on May 4th results in 4 items. And our first item is the Sedgwick County Zoo project for the zoo parking lots, mill, and overlay for Public Works. This recommendation is to accept the low responsive bid from ConSpec Incorporated, doing business as Kansas Paving, in the amount of $413,838.14. Item number 2 Ronald Reagan Building, Phase 2, Operation Support Services. This recommendation is to accept the low bid from Key Construction Incorporated in the amount of $1,337,800. Item number 3 is the treatment chemicals and services for the closed and open loop HVAC systems for Operation Support Services. And this recommendation is to accept the low responsive bid from ChemTreat Incorporated and to establish contract pricing at the rates listed for a period of 5 years. And our final item, item number 4, is the on-call laboratory services employee drug testing for various departments. And this recommendation is to accept the best proposal from the National Screening Bureau, doing business as by the same name, LLC, and establish contract pricing at the rates listed for 3 years with 2 one-year options to renew. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have, and I recommend approval of the 4 items.
Thank you, Joe. Commissioners, are there any questions? Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, I guess, make a comment. I'll support the recommendation of the Board of Bids and Contracts, but I just want to say when it comes to the zoo parking lot, again, I'm very supportive of the zoo, so please get that out of the way. But I did go out there and look at the parking lot, and it just seems to me that it's not probably needing to have this work done. I don't know if it's a year or 2 early. I'll support this, but I'll concede to the experts. But I guess my opinion is there may be some minor problems in the parking lot, some widening of cracks, perhaps, that maybe ought to be addressed. But overall, general condition of the parking lot, in my opinion, is very good. And so I'm just a little concerned about spending $400,000 for something. I'm not so sure the timing of this is correct. We may be a little bit more aggressive on our significant maintenance like this, maybe more than we should be. I'd like to encourage us to maybe try to wear things out before we start replacing stuff. So I'm just not sure the timing of this is exactly right. However, because it's being recommended today, I will support that, but I do have a concern about this type of work. We ought to maybe find other ways to assess whether our timing is absolutely appropriate or not. And then my only other comment would be that, again, I'm glad to get the Reagan building behind us, and so I'm going to support the motion today to get this Key Construction bid out. Once again, I have nobody I'm friends with necessarily that's going to benefit from this in any way. I just think that they've got the low bid, and they ought to go ahead and get that work done. I guess I do have one question. That is, looking at the paving issue on the first item, you mentioned there's a low responsive bid. Can you please explain that? Because there actually is a lower bid on the sheet.
Yes, sir. The Public Works issued a revision on the statement of pricing because the work had changed. The milling of the 1 to 1.5 inch of the material was changed to be salvaged and recycled and taken to the west yard, I believe. And the bidder, Flint Hills, did not provide that particular revised bid when they produced their bid, so they didn't give a true up-to-spec bid for this particular project. I hope that explains it.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And with that, I would like to make a motion we would approve the recommendations of the Boards of Bids and Contracts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell, I want to give you an opportunity to speak, but I was wanting the county engineer to respond to a couple of those.
And yeah, that's fine.
Is that all right? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner Howell, I'd just like to respond to your comments. And I do like discussing this because there are some folks out there who think we should let something wear out before we replace it. What the various seminars and conferences I've been to say the best thing to do is preventive maintenance. And when you do preventive maintenance, you actually save money in the long run. That's what we do to our roads, and that's what we're trying to do to this parking lot. So I just want to tell you that the last work done on that was in 2011, and it was done an entire treatment over the entire parking lot, a very thin, what's called BFS, bituminous frictional seal. And it did not, it's very cheap. In fact, we spent like $97,000 on it. You can compare that to the bid today. But it did not perform the way we wanted, and it really, this parking lot we should have done something last year. Last year we filled all the cracks. There were some enormous cracks out there that we filled, and then we're running short on money. So we decided, okay, we'll go one more year. So it's been 6 years this year since we did anything. And I just want to tell you that by doing this, you will extend the life on the parking lots. If you let it completely wear out, you would spend well in 7-digit numbers to replace this parking lot. When parking lot C was constructed out there in 2004, that was $1 million in itself. Just when we built some new parking lots when the zoo was getting popular, more and more popular. So just, and I know it's hard to understand for a lot of people that you are saving money, but you really are. It's that thing, pay me now or pay me later. So this is not a lot of money. Oh, the bid was excellent bid. I think we're getting good bids now because KDOT is doing less work than they used to, and we're the beneficiary of that. So the contractors, we're having different contractors come in, and this is the competition that really helps a lot. I also want to comment on the inch or an inch and a half. It is 1 inch, and that is in the plans. Mr. Weber at the bid board said an inch or an inch and a half. It's not an inch and a half. It's exactly 1 inch, and that's what all the quantities are based on. So I wanted to make that clear also, and I'd be glad to answer any other questions that anybody has about that.
Mr. Spears, didn't Public Works receive a big award and a plaque for the work on the zoo parking lot a few years back?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we received so many awards that I do not recall that we did on that.
Well, I think my memory's right. You
okay, we might have.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That answered a lot of my questions. I was just going to say if Mr. Howell did believe that there was that parking lot was in good shape. I mean, I wouldn't mind postponing that till we saw, pictures or more evidence about it. But after hearing David and then Mr. Howell's motion, I'm good with moving ahead.
Okay, very good. Now, do we have a second to?
No, sir, we do not have a second.
I'll second the motion.
We have a second to accept the recommendation of the Board of Bids and Contracts. We have another comment from Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to amend my motion. I think I'll go ahead and go forward. Again, I do trust our staff, and I trust their expertise. I appreciate the perspective of our expert public works engineer, the chief engineer of the county, explaining that. And we did talk about this for just a moment yesterday. And again, I'm not going to second guess that. I trust them to make those decisions. I just want to say, from my perspective, I'm not even saying it's even true, but I guess my goal would be if it were possible to wait a year and nothing bad would happen, that would be a better decision. And I don't know that that's possible. So I don't have a way to assess that. I just anecdotally feel the parking lot looks pretty good, and certainly don't want to cause more expense down the road by not taking care of or maintaining our infrastructure. So with that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to support the motion once again. Thank you.
Thank you. And no one else is requesting to speak, so we have a motion and a second. So, Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Consent agenda.
Commissioners, Mike Scholes, County Manager, recommend you approve consent agenda items India through November.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve consent items India through November.
Second.
Motion and a second. No one's asking to speak. Madam Clerk, call the vote.
Commissioner Dennis?
Aye.
Commissioner Ranza?
Aye.
Commissioner Howell?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Chairman Unruh?
Aye. Next item.
Legislative issues.
Good morning again, Commissioners. Just a few items this morning while the legislature is tackling the three-headed monster of school finance budget and the potential for a tax increase. They are taking up some additional items, including a couple today that are of interest. I know there's some questions that had been posed to me earlier about Senate Bill 146, which is the continuation of the 20 mil statewide levy for schools. The interesting thing, it's being heard today, and there is, to kind of piggyback our earlier discussion about TIFs, there is a proposal in the current version where any new IRBs issued for economic development, that those properties would not be exempt for the purposes of this levy. It does not address any other economic development tools, including TIFs, where that would be also true. So I wanted to point that out to you. At this point, that bill would have no effect on the county. Obviously, it is a funding tool to try and make sure that the schools are, what's the constitutional term? That they are adequately funded. So that's up to date. The other item of interest, which is kind of unusual, the expanded gaming bill is being heard in a second committee today, with the possibility of that committee taking action on the bill. To clarify, because I know there have been some questions posed to our communications department, this bill is being forwarded by those who own the facilities in the hopes of getting gaming machines at the racetrack. This is not something that I believe this commission has taken a position on, and I don't believe that there's any intent for this commission to take a position on this bill. If the legislature deems that there is a possibility that they want to pass this and have the governor sign it, then the only thing that would affect this board is if a petition with adequate signatures was presented to this board, then you would have no option but to place it on a ballot for the voters to vote on whether or not they want expanded gaming in Sedgwick County. So just to clarify that's up there. It's being heard again today in a second committee. I stand for any questions.
Commissioner Renzo.
Tell me again, back on the first item, what does it do exactly? It exempts?
The statewide mill levy for schools currently, if there's a property subject to industrial revenue bonds for economic development, those properties continue to remain exempt and they're not subject to that mill levy. What the bill that's being heard today would take away that exemption for any new IRBs issued for economic development, but it doesn't change anything for other economic development tools like a TIF. It would make those properties subject to the statewide mill levy, but it wouldn't for other economic development tool type properties.
I get it.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I see no one else asking to speak, so thank you for that update.
Thank you.
Next item.
Other.
Commissioners, opportunity to bring up comments on other items of community interest. Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to highlight an opportunity for the community. The final public input for the ARC 95 project, I guess at this stage of planning, is scheduled for at least, I think there's probably one in Hayesville as well. I don't know the details of it. But the one in Derby that's in my district will be tomorrow. That's May the 11th at 5 o'clock p.m. I believe at the Derby Welcome Center, which is where it was the last time. And again, this is called the ARC 95. It's about a road improvement that goes between roughly Woodlawn in the city of Derby on 95th Street, crossing that, going over to, I think, Meridian. And that project is a fairly significant project to the public getting around the county. And so if they would like to weigh in exactly how that's going to work and the costs and get an idea exactly how the configuration is being proposed and that type of thing, they have a chance tomorrow night. And I will be there, and I would look forward to meeting with people and discussing this tomorrow night at 5 p.m. at the Derby Welcome Center. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? I see no one asking to speak, so we also do not have an executive session or fire district meeting, so we've come to the end of our agenda, and without objection, we will declare the meeting adjourned.